But again, recognize Hayden Balsam, and right here, student member, introduced him this morning, but Hayden, we're glad to have you with us, and Daryl Cobins. So Daryl is from Memphis, replacing Cato on the board, so we're really pleased to have you with us. I just presented him with his official pin and so forth. So, and Hayden has his pin, so we're all set. We do have a new board member also replacing Bill Trout. He wasn't able to be here today, but it's Lang Wiseman, who is an attorney. Wendy, I've always heard the story that, you know, if you got one attorney in town starve to death, you get the second attorney and both of them prosper. So I guess maybe that's a story for us here anyway. But
Mr. Chairman, let the record reflect that 2 new members are sitting with me. I do what I can to help them ease in.
Oh, yeah. Well, you've got a big role to play since Mike isn't here today to help with that process. Lang is a founding member of Wiseman Ray PLCC. He's a graduate basketball scholarship from UT, had basketball scholarship at UT, graduate there, also from Harvard Law School. He, like Daryl, has been on most of the boards and so forth that I can find in Memphis, but he's currently chair of the Shelby County Republican Party, Governor's Council on judicial appointments, and he is replacing Bill Trout. So we're glad to have all these new members on the board. We had a great meeting with THEC this morning. I think it went really well, and as we said, I think it's one of the better meetings we've had with THEC, and appreciate Mike and Sarah's work on getting that plan. Got some new staff members also for the state board. So Sarah, if you could introduce your new staff members that are here.
Sure. I always have to do a little mental check, make sure I'm thinking of everybody who's joined us since the last meeting. But I see Brittany Kendrick in the back. You want to raise your hand? Brittany is our new staff attorney, and she has jumped into the deep end. You'll be hearing from her later today, but we're thrilled to have her in this role, working really closely with Elizabeth Taylor and with all our staff on the licensure discipline cases. And then Amy Owen is also new to our team since April. She joins us as our new Director of Research and Policy, and we are thrilled to have her. She was formerly at the department. We're just changing our chairs around, but she also jumped in with both feet and is leading a lot of our work on the research and policy front. So we'll be hearing from Amy too in upcoming meetings. And I think, is Sharon Griffin with us too? Sharon has been with us this summer and is going to be continuing on with us for a little bit of the rest of the year. Sharon's been working, she's an MPP student at Vanderbilt, but has been working with us on a couple different things, including our performance frameworks for our charter schools and our content assessment review. So we're thrilled that she's going to be able to keep with us for at least a few hours into the fall.
Okay.
Is Lee coming for Lee? I just want to recognize Lee. This is her last meeting with us, which is a sad moment, but we're already bringing her back for some other things. She's in DC now with her fiance, so this is no love lost. She's just love gained in DC and staying there with her fiance and can't do remote work forever. So, thank you, Lee.
Maybe she can get DC straightened out.
We're hoping.
Okay.
Give it a go.
Okay. Good. Okay. Well, with that, let's proceed with the agenda. And the first item is an update on the charter school subcommittee. Lisa?
So glad I don't have a unique microphone in front of my face. I'll have food in my mouth. So yes, we just convened for the first time our charter school subcommittee. And so because it was a first time venture, we focused mostly on building our own knowledge, quite frankly, in terms of very tactical processes and how we discharge our duties as a board. So we certainly feel a great responsibility to understand the appeals process and generally what our responsibilities are as a board. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of the things that we reviewed. I'm not planning to go into detail, but if people have questions, we're obviously, the three of us are happy to entertain them. But yes, number one, we did spend some time literally just going through the charter application process, the timelines, what's involved, what our duties are. That was very, very helpful to understand. And then also what the Board of Education, the appeal process looks. Again, we got down to tactics, brass tacks of calendars, And what the team is working on behind the scenes is incredibly involved. I was very impressed, admittedly, by what they laid out, because they're playing good chess. They're thinking multiple steps ahead and trying to ensure that we're well positioned to execute our responsibilities. We talked a bit about the authorization duties of the board, and then closed up with a discussion of potential topics for the future. But it really was just mostly us sitting and listening to information that was relevant to executing what we need to execute. And that's really all I have.
Okay. Any questions from Alicia?
I would just add a shout out to Tess and her team, because what we were listening to was all the work that they've done. So it was great for them to break it down for us once again. And even though I felt like I was here for most of that, I learned even more from having them set it out even again, and was, as Elisa said, super impressed with all the work. So thank you guys.
I would just add to, I shared this with the subcommittee, but I'm excited about our work in this space in a lot of respects. First, though, I think it's going to inform our policy work more broadly to be this deep into the work with districts and with schools. So I think it's just going to give us more insight into the policies that we need to be setting and adjusting to serve all students in all schools by kind of doing this deep dive with a few of these charter schools that fall under our responsibility.
Okay. I'm sure everybody read all the material we got on the agenda for the policies that are associated with this.
They are numerous.
They are numerous. Assuming that we didn't do all that work initially, we've been able to capture work from other places to put all that together, but it's a lot of work involved in being an authorizer for a school. So good work. Good work on that. Okay. Any other questions, comments on the charter school subcommittee's work? Okay, we'll move forward to the legislative update, and Nathan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Before we get started, I want to recognize someone who's been a friend to the State Board of Education and a lot of our work on Capitol Hill for the last several years. Patrick, will you stand up, please? Patrick serves as a research analyst effectively to 4 committees, both the full committees, House Education committees, and also the subcommittees. He juggles a tremendous amount of scheduling, and is always a resource to the members of the House and anyone who has time to spend with him. So thank you. Well, our legislative priorities this year were fairly slim, but we did get 100% of them passed. Let's see, we went twice. Let's go back a bit. Okay, let's stay right there. The first one we wanted to do was to move the deadline for the teacher prep report card up from November 1st to the 15th of February. We have found ourselves in a bit of a crunch, and as you know, the teacher prep report card has become far more substantive and interactive. We wanted to make certain that we were able to publish it at a time when it would still be helpful to all the districts and to seniors in high school who are deciding which school of education they wanted to go to, but also so that we could have the fullness of information from districts before we had to take that and produce it. The second piece was to restate more clearly our authority over teacher preparation programs. Some folks had been unclear about the authority that the state board has because the authority was stated in a different section of Title 49. So we had the good folks of the Code Commission simply restate it in a place where it would be a little easier to find. Moving on to the budget hearings. For our new members especially, the importance of the budget hearing can't be overstated. This gives us the opportunity to explain to our funders, and remember the funders are the people of Tennessee, and the people who decide how their money is spent are the Finance, Ways and Means committees and the stand on the House side, and the Standing Committee on Education and Finance, Ways and Means on the Senate side. These committees can use that time to punish an agency, to reward an agency, to publicly embarrass them, or they can take the time to give them an attaboy. And I think we had a lot more positives pretty well every step of the way. We were one of very few, the only agency I know of, to bring a reduction in our budget this year. That was a 14% reduction. And that coincided with the ending of the standards review process. So we actually were appropriated 14% fewer dollars before Representative White and his conversations with us and with the governor's office put in money for an additional full-time employee who we were most tickled to have. And that is specifically for the teacher prep report card. Remember, members, that Representative White, he came and he spent some time with this board when we were at UT in West Tennessee. And he came and he said, what can I do to help? Well, and he was persistent about that. So the only budget request he made to the governor about any subject was to make sure that this process was bolstered and that our staff was bolstered to make this stronger as it goes. On the other side of things, there was a bill that was introduced to perpetuate the standards review process, which we just undertook. Now, it's well understood that no standards review process really undertaken anywhere nationwide has been more inclusive and more thorough. But at the same time, when this bill got to the Senate Finance, Ways and Means Committee, there was no motion on an appropriation amendment to make it happen. And very specifically, that was done as a message to myself and to this board that at that point in time, they were displeased about the amount of Tennessee history which was in the standards. Of course, after this, and it was a matter of in the next 10 days after they took this action, they also passed legislation to create a standalone Tennessee history course. But we speak legislative ease and we understand what they were after. And we've done everything possible to include them in the process. And this bill may come up again next year, depending on the will of the legislature. Now, for our new members, you will be going through legislative confirmations. TCA 491301A makes it clear that all of our members are subject to appointment by the governor and confirmation by the General Assembly. Now, while in the modern era, no state board of education nominee has been rejected, other boards have seen rejections. And it has been used as a means to exert some control over executive appointments. In our case, we had Senate Joint Resolutions 123, 124, and 125. Let's go to some pictures of the hearings. Well, through twice. Let's go back one. There we go. And I am pleased today to present on behalf of the Senate to our new confirmees from Senator Gresham and Harper. Elisa Kim, this is your confirmation resolution. It's absolutely suitable for framing. And also on behalf of the Senators Gresham and Ketchum, yours as well, sir. So congratulations on your unanimous confirmation. That might be worth a picture afterwards, by the way, Mr. Chairman. So the members appear in front of the Senate Education Committee and undergo some questioning. The House committees generally have them appear as a group, and it's not quite as in-depth usually. Here they are posing. Gordon's getting grilled a little bit here. And then over to the right, you see our new members as the guest of Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally, who's the Speaker of the Senate and also the Dean of the General Assembly. So I think it was a good day on Capitol Hill. Let's take a look at some legislative branch initiatives to start with. Senate Bill 662 became Public Chapter 99 and updated the requirements for physical activity to 130 minutes per week for all elementary school students and 90 minutes per week for middle and high school students. PC 482, which was Senate Bill 864, required that Tennessee history course. Now, had that maybe happened before the Finance, Ways and Means Committee got to the issue on the standards, it could have gone a little differently, but that's not the way it happened. So always next year on that. And Public Chapter 450, requiring the LEA to offer students in each of its high schools the opportunity to take at least 4 early post-secondary credit courses. Now that's an issue that we discussed this morning, that I've spent the last couple of days discussing with higher education leaders from around the state. Another one is this issue of adrenal insufficiency. So Senator Briggs brought this bill, and it charges the State Board of Education in conjunction with our department partners with coming up with regulations to foster the ability of adrenaline to be administered on an emergency basis at schools throughout the state. This has been done with other drugs in the past. And I can tell you, just to give you an update on where we are, meetings are in progress, and we have been conferring both with advocates and the parents who brought this issue forward. Our friends at the department are also engaging the folks at the Department of Health and other partners, Children's Services and others that are laid out in the statute. Teacher protection. This is a unique bill. Senator Gresham and Representative Rudd put forward this act, PC 407, Tennessee Educators Protection Act. And what it does is it provides a remedy to a teacher to file a civil action against a parent or guardian who has brought frivolous accusations against an LEA employee, specifically a teacher. So this will be interesting as we move forward. I really just tapped that once. Oh, there's one back from there. There we go. Senator Massey brought Senate Bill 524 this year. One of the things that she's had concern with is she wanted to make certain that that American Sign Language would satisfy the requirement for foreign language for our high school students moving forward, specifically also with the idea that it would be accepted by universities. And some universities are accepting it at this point and some are not, but moving forward, this piece of legislation obviously informs some of the rules that we'll be passing later, but is certainly going to be a game changer in terms of American Sign Language in Tennessee. Senate Joint Resolution 107 was passed by Senator Tracy, and our staff have been working on it for last couple of months in conjunction with the folks at the department. And this is about focusing on funding of career prep and post-secondary opportunities. Now, Senator Tracy, this is a good example of having a good touch at the legislature. Senator Tracy was prepared originally to bring some legislation to this point, but a joint resolution instead expresses the will of the General Assembly and gives us the opportunity to work with partners in an official way where we'll report back to him about it without necessarily putting something into the code that changes the law for all time. So I think this is going to prove to be pretty useful. Executive branch and Department of Education priorities made law. We have all of these, for the most part, are administration bills, and administration bills are almost always handled by the leaders of the respective houses. So you'll see Senator Norris on every bill brought by the administration, but he handles some, but not all of them. You have educating students in juvenile detention, school district accountability, high quality charter schools, and assessment data. So Public Chapter 152 deals with the issue of where does the BEP money go when you have a student that's taken into custody and placed in a juvenile detention center. In many cases, you're talking about a student that goes from LEA to LEA and maybe is in custody for sometimes a very short period of time, sometimes a longer period of time. And it has been a particular challenge, especially for LEAs, to pull down the BEP dollars on these students. This is a process. These rules are something we're working on, of course, with the department and with TSBA just in the last couple of weeks to figure out where this needs to go. You'll see rules on this later on. That had an effective date, by the way, of April 17th. School and district accountability. This changes some of the effects of legislation, the original legislation for ASD. Says that only priority schools represented, the only priority schools would be those in the bottom 5% that have a 67% or lower graduation rate. It takes care of some of the ESSA flexibility around graduation rates that was included in our plan, and redefines exit criteria for schools placed in the ASD. One of the largest issues you'll hear at the General Assembly throughout the years is what is the exact process of getting out of the ASD? And the department, the administration, I think were certainly had their ears open and worked with a lot of folks to try to come up with some key legislation to make that a little clearer. This is a bill that we partnered early on with the department. And of course, they partnered with a lot of folks. But I'm very pleased to say that this High Quality Charter Schools Act will put the state in a position where it's no longer just the State Board of Education that has to follow the NACSA best practices. In fact, much of what we were hoping would be in this bill was in the bill. That's fee transparency, right? So while the locals will have an authorizer fee, again, you're going to have that accounted for. It's going to be clear to the citizens of Tennessee how those dollars are spent. And that's a pretty big deal if you're talking about a process of a fee on a unique public school, which our charter schools are. The NACSA standards can't be overstated. Just talk to Tess. She has spent so much time with the good folks over at NACSA making sure that when we adopt our policies as an LEA, that they're in keeping with the best practices and best standards in the country. And this administration and this department are now going to have everyone step up to that level. We're certainly going to have a lot more related rules and policies, board members, so stay tuned for those. And also keep in mind, this created a facility grant. And yes, any schools that do come to the state board that we find ourselves authorizing, those schools are as eligible as any others. The use of assessment data, Public Chapter 192, this resets the phase-in for the 2016-17 school year for reasons that board members are familiar with, and moves that back a bit. Adjust these percentages of the TCAP scores, and I don't know if the commissioner, if you have anything specific you wanted to say about this piece, but you certainly feel free to jump in on any of these bills that were yours. So it allows teacher effect results to be used for research purposes, provided that the results are not made public. I know that was done as an amendment about halfway through. Now we get into our budget highlights, and this is pretty extraordinary news, especially I would say to our new members of the State Board of Education. For a state like Tennessee to set aside hundreds of millions of dollars the way that we have year after year for educator compensation is pretty extraordinary. We're talking about $250 million in new funding for K-12. That's a $200 million increase in the BEP. Certainly one of the largest funding increases in Tennessee history, if not the largest without a tax increase, if I'm not mistaken. So also, Mr. Chairman, you and I spent a great deal of time talking about the BEP, and we meet with the BEP Review Committee. And the BEP Review Committee has undertaken a process to make it clear what our priorities are at about this time in the year, instead of in November when the budget's already done and everybody's met. But this year we had two of our BEP Review Committee's priorities that really won out in a big way. English language learners with $22.2 million BEP dollars to assist districts in educating ELL students. That's massive. That's massive. Nearly $60 million for BEP enrollment growth and inflation, and $18 million for current year enrollment growth. There have been times in the past where that's been certainly difficult to come up with, but what a step forward. What a step forward. $15 million to help schools acquire equipment for their CTE programs. And I can tell you, from your discussion earlier, there's the BEP Review Committee, which laid out some of these priorities, will be doing so also in about the next month. And once those priorities are done, with your permission, Mr. Chairman, I'll send those out to all our members. We'll be ready there. So I do have a complete list, if anyone wants it, of all legislation passed this session related to education. But in the meantime, I'm also quite happy to take questions, comments, and answer them to the best of my ability.
Okay, questions from Nathan? Mindy?
I'm modeling for the new members. So I have 3 questions. I'll start maybe with the simplest. You mentioned on the education of incarcerated students, the effective date of April 17th. That's like already passed. You mean 2017?
Yeah. But so a lot of times a bill, if the legislature, they have these magical words, as you know, as an attorney, but others may not realize that they can say the public welfare requiring it at the end of a bill, and constitutionally, that's what makes it happen right now. Legislation typically is enacted on the 1st of July or with the beginning of the next fiscal year. But that legislation was passed with an immediate effective date. That having been said, it was very clear to everyone that we have to go through the rulemaking process. And that's what we're doing, both with policies and rules, which will appear on your agenda.
Okay, so that leads me to, can I just do my 3? My second question, which is on the Quality Charters Act.
Right.
One of the changes, and I think you mentioned it briefly, was the prior statute. I pulled it up so you wouldn't have to worry about pulling up statute. Had chartering authorities are encouraged to adopt national authorizing standards, and then we had to have the best practices. And then the new statute has that they shall adopt policies and practices for quality charter authorizing standards as approved by the state board. So my question is, do we know yet what that timeline is? And does that, the language isn't as clear to me. So does that mean we are approving standards and sending them out? Does that mean they're telling us their standards and we have to, like we do with the EPP stuff, or
So
what?
it's a great question.
Yes.
We've been talking about this a lot lately.
Yes, and I want to preview the subcommittee meeting in a couple weeks, but we're going to dive deeper into that around our ideas of process for development of that. I have been working with NACSA to understand how this has been done in other states and how we could implement this on in our state in the best way possible. So preview to come, but I think we want to make sure that there's stakeholder engagement on this process, but that we're really setting a bar for what we expect of authorizers.
Okay, because that law went into effect July 1, and I know we have authorizing like application processes at districts now. So I'm just trying to figure out how that's going to intersect with districts that aren't following best practices.
Well, here's one of the things. So you can have, as you're well aware, statutes that don't quite agree necessarily on timeframes. There is no possible way for the State Board of Education to adopt those standards instantaneously.
Right.
We have a process, and our processes aren't just because we choose to have them that way, but because they're set up in law as well. And all of those steps that we do go through the promulgation in the case of rules, and then back through the government operations committees, the joint GovOps committees of both houses. So I would say that was well known. Does that mean effectively these things aren't done before this next school year? I'm thinking probably there would be a delay on it. So, but we also have to follow the other statutes that govern our authority, and that's one of those situations. Which Wendy well knows, but I'm saying that for the
Right, and I'm not asking it for purposes of expecting us to like wave a magic wand. I guess my question, and it may be a longer conversation, it may be a subcommittee conversation, I don't know, but we have districts right now considering charter applications that may wind up with us on appeal. And this, on the books anyway, by July 1, they're using, we're going to have to figure out as an authorizer, I remember at least one district in a past year's application process that was far from best practices, and what that looks like and how this intersects. That was my curiosity about it. But to be determined. Okay, and then my last question, the budget, the EL funding, 22.2 million.
Yeah, let me scroll back to that.
Which is fabulous. Is that in the BEP, or is there some other process for that?
Now, as I understand it, that's going to be through the BEP formula. Am I correct, Commissioner?
Okay, so it's just making the pie bigger for purposes of, okay.
Yeah.
That's it.
And we're all for making the pie bigger, so.
I love big pies.
Hey, other questions for Nate? Gordon?
I have a question or a clarification on the SGR 107 that Senator Tracy's working on for the best practices for funding career preparation and post-secondary opportunities.
Yes, sir.
Is the basis there thinking, I mean, what we're seeing in Rutherford County, at least, we've got a lot of good things going on there, but are we thinking there's other best practices out there that we're trying to identify? Is that what's driving that?
So that was brought to him by the Nashville Chamber of Commerce folks. And they originally wanted to ask the BEP Review Committee to do that. I talked with them and said, why don't you just ask the board and the department directly, so that that's something we can sink more into. And I know our staff has also been in conversation with the Education Commission of the States, which is an interstate compact that Tennessee is a member of, that has a really tremendous research capability. I don't know what's scratching, but I would say that what he's after is really a snapshot of the different models from around the country. At least to read the text of it, and in conversations I've had, that I think is the direction he's going in there.
Let me mention also, it's not only about the model that we need to look at, but would there be something we want to do or think about short-term or long-term, where you would fund career and technical education through the BEP in a way that is different than how we currently fund it? So part of this is about looking at the BEP specifically and our current funding on CTE. We certainly are including Senator Tracy in a new advisory group that we put together for college and career and technical education. So some of what he is concerned about or is thinking about will be part of some of the department's work going forward too.
Hey, other questions? One of the things, Nathan, I guess that I'm concerned about, very interested in, is funding for the standards review process.
Yes, sir.
I think that, we've had just enormous success with the standards review process, and I think we've got, some of the big standards kind of out of the way, but we've got more coming, and we're intent on doing that every 6 years. So I'm hoping that we can maintain funding for that process somewhat.
Well, and it's an interesting spot too, because there's no general appropriation, there's no portion of our budget outside of that which was specifically allocated for that public chapter, which, by the way, was a one-off kind of thing. They said, do this one time. And they created a fund with carry forward provisions. And what that means is the state can sink money into it 1 year, and it would move forward so that there would be enough money there to do the standards review properly in the future. But that was, that's where that money came from. There's no line item in our budget for standards review outside of that. So I know that we'll be meeting with folks in the administration and folks upstairs. I think we'll be certainly having conversations about the possibility of perhaps seeing if the administration would want to fund that in next year's budget, or how that would look. But with it having made it all the way to the Finance, Ways and Means committees, okay, that means that it passed subcommittee and full committee in both houses. You had Chairman Sargent, who's chairman of Finance, Ways and Means on the House side, and you had Senator Gresham, chairman of the Education Committee on the Senate side, who were the sponsors on that bill. And so, I would say I think it has a good chance, but that is a decision they'll have to make. They certainly had never put that money in for standards review from the state board before. And, and that money went away. That's where a 14% reduction came from. But there's no way to look at that process and not be proud of the work that was done. And so, I certainly agree with you, and I'm happy to take whatever direction you give me, sir.
Okay. Well, I think that is an important item, and I think somehow we've got to be able to move forward with that kind of process and other standards. And of course, we'd be updating some of the ones that are already out there that also is significant.
And I will say that this wasn't one of our priorities. We didn't necessarily come up with the idea in the first place. We were in the room every step of the way. We had conversations every step of the way, and we facilitated it with fidelity and zeal. But this year, it was a matter of legislators who recognized it, felt positively about it, and wanted to move it forward. So, but legislature is, a 2 years at a time, and we're entering the second year, and the bill is not dead. So we'll see what happens with it.
And I think it's kind of unfortunate, it kind of got caught up in the discussion about Tennessee history, and it's something I think we need to get back to if at all possible. Okay. Other questions? Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, we'll move to Tennessee Ready and High School Data Update. Kansas, you would do that, or Dr. Towns?
Well, good afternoon. I was first thrilled that you were able to come to our more public announcement this morning, and appreciate the opportunity to dig into this a bit more with you and answer any questions that you have. We do have a few slides and wanted you to have a hard copy of those since they are hot off the press. I will go into some of the high-level stories that we had from this morning, and then Dr. Towns will actually talk more specifically about each one of our subject area tests and what we found through the second year of high school end of course results. And I hope I'm pointing this in the right direction. There we go. First, in a sort of sense of pride, we did have improvement across all of our subject areas, including, as you know, some subject areas where we were hoping for growth, but we knew we had made a very significant transition, particularly in math, and we did still see overall improvement in math, and we're going to dig into each one of those content exams momentarily. We saw that improvement where we can say we have thousands of additional students that are actually now scoring proficient and on grade level over where we were last year in our first year of this transition to higher standards and an aligned assessment to those standards. We, had this overall improvement, but also our progress was shown across our historically underserved student groups. We will note in a moment that our English language learners probably across the board did not have as much growth as our other students, but we did have some growth with students with disabilities that we had actually not seen in some of our past years, particularly as they move across the different proficiency levels. As I move to the next slide, I think I have to push it 4 times. All right, reduce the percentage of students scoring at the lowest achievement level. And I mentioned this morning what you hope to see if you know you're truly aligning to expectations. You hope to see that there is movement from that bottom proficiency level to the next proficiency level and so on. So we're definitely getting more students to proficiency, but you're continuing to increase the students' likelihood of over a very short period of time of being on track. And we were able to see some positive momentum there. This year, thousands of additional students were scoring at that approaching level, which means they moved out of that bottom proficiency level. We had 17,000 more kids in English language arts move out of that bottom level. That is a significant number for us. And then around 7,000 more kids in math that moved. We saw that movement particularly true amongst some of our historically underserved student groups that we monitor carefully. We had several of those groups that actually outpaced that all student category of growth. And so again, showing the momentum of change around expectations. And then this last item was one we also noted this morning, that the percentage of students with disabilities scoring at that lowest level of achievement decreased in every individual content area, and they fell by over 19 percentage points in English 1. Again, we've not seen that type of movement in some of our past results. Oh, no wonder I'm using the wrong one. Thank you. Okay, well, there we go. We also are continuing as we march forward on a second year of TN Ready. We're continuing to see alignment in the classroom. I had an opportunity to spend a great bit of time in high schools this past year on one of the portions of our Classroom Chronicles tour, and teachers, high school teachers, are beginning to really make some of these significant shifts that we're starting to see in our data. In particular, an understanding of the shift that has to be made in math. Dr. Towns is going to talk about how significant that was for us last year, and we're still trying to move those shifts forward. When you remove the universal accommodation of a calculator, then quite frankly, you are going to have some time to make that transition solid across all of our districts. And we have seen some movement, but we still have more work to do in that area. I note that we do have room to improve. I think that goes without saying. We don't have enough students on track. We don't have enough students moving from on track to mastery. And certainly we don't have enough students that are fully completing their post-secondary career when they leave our high schools. And so we know we have more work to do, but we are showing some of that growth in the second year that we had all hoped for. This chart shows that those results in a graphic form. I do want to note, as Chairman Ralston pointed out this morning, the science test shows that significant growth, but remember that is the one test that is still under the old TCAP construct. So it's transitioning to those deeper standards, the higher standards, as we transition to new science standards in 2018-19. So not this school year, but next year. We will be rolling out those science standards this year, beginning, quite frankly, this fall. Before I transition to Dr. Towns, who will actually pull up the website, and we're going to show you where you can see exact numbers of kids who are in each category by all of the subject areas and some of our other items that are now posted on our website as of this morning. But she's also going to talk through several of the nuances across the different subject area end of course exams. But I want to say that we are certainly proud of the educators and our students for their work on aligning to this new expectation in our state. And while we've had 60% or so of kids leaving high school and having to have some kind of remediation or having to go into a developmental course when they get to post-secondary, we believe this continued growth, we will begin to see fewer and fewer students being told you're not ready when they get to that next stage, which will ultimately result in more of our students getting credentials, diplomas, and degrees, which means more students are experiencing that success that we all care so much about. And I have no doubt that we're going to see it across all student groups because we're already beginning to see that momentum, and it will be a significant part of our work this year and next year as we have new goals around equity, new accountability around equity, and more transparency around the work that we're doing to ensure we're not leaving any student behind, but we're moving all students to those success points that we have in our goals. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Towns.
We're going to switch, I think.
So great. As the commissioner noted, before I get into some of these details on the slides, I wanted to switch over and actually show on the website where you can find more of this information. So on our landing page at tn.gov/education, we have the TN Ready EOC results as part of our banner. And if you click into the banner, this is the page that it takes you to. And so if you click into under additional resources, the first link is actually our Excel sheet of our EOC results. So, and it really looks like this, and when it comes up, you'll see it, that we actually have now published for everyone all of our individual courses, the 11 courses that we have in EOC by all students and by each of our 4 subgroups, economically disadvantaged, Black, Hispanic, Native American, students with disabilities, and English language learners. So you can sort and filter this to focus on a particular content area, to focus on a particular subgroup so that you can really see the trends. What's important about that too is in the first columns, you're able to see actually numbers of students And then at the end, it gets into percentages. So this was the conversation that we were having this morning, that we have looked at individual student counts in terms of moving to those other performance levels, as well as converting that into percentages. And now we've transparently shared that with the public so that folks can dig more deeply into some of the headlines that we're giving, but all of the data is there for folks to kind of review and make sense of. So let's get back into the presentation.
It takes a minute to switch.
No, that's perfectly fine. Great. All right. So I'm going to go through each of the content areas in terms of English, math, science, and U.S. history, and talk a little bit more deeply about how our students did. So in English, we definitely saw the strongest gains in our English courses across English 1, 2, and 3. We saw that we improved from a 30.4% of our students being on track or mastered last year up to 34.3% of our students being on track or mastered across all of our English subject tests this year. So this means that we had more than 11,000 additional students scoring on track or mastered, and then more than 17,000 additional students who scored approaching. And we keep highlighting that because we want to make sure that folks recall we raised our standards and our expectations around cut scores. And so when we now define what it means to be on track, recall that that is a comprehensive understanding and thorough ability to apply. That's what it means to be on track. At approaching, students have a partial ability to apply and that they have mastered some of the content. So we want to make sure that folks know that the approaching movement is actually meaningful, and that means that students are demonstrating a higher level of knowledge, skills, and capabilities that we want to recognize. And we've also put this as a part of our accountability framework, that we want to see movement of students across all the performance levels. So here on this slide, you see each of the 3 content areas. English 1 is at the top of the graph, English 2 in the middle, English 3 at the bottom. The orange area is what is the lowest performance level, that below level. And you see that across all of these, you see the orange shrinking. And that's what we want to see. That means that students are moving along the performance continuum. And then on the other side, you see that the green and the blue, that is what we consider on track or mastered. And these are those students who have demonstrated that comprehensive understanding and thorough ability to apply the content level expectations. So those are the results across English. Those are very strong, and I think they represent the fact that we've been working with students over the past several years with the writing assessment, even before we rolled out TN Ready, to see that students were able to write and respond to passages and identify evidence from the text and show that they actually have been able to analyze and synthesize that information to respond to a prompt. So we're actually seeing the fruits of our labor even before the TN Ready transition. So let's talk about high school math. As the commissioner noted, this is where, when we think about the TN Ready transition last year, this was a very significant change. So we did a couple of things. We did introduce the no calculator component to that assessment, and these are students in high school who, through their K-12 career, have been able to use the calculator for all portions of our state assessment. So we removed that. And at the same time, we also introduced the open-ended questions. What that means is that you did not have the opportunity to see the question in front of you, to see the answer rather in front of you. We removed multiple choice, and that means that students have to construct the knowledge, right? They have to come up with the answer and be able to write that in and actually show what they were able to do without the prompting of multiple choice. So both of those, I think, show us that there was definitely an uptick in rigor that students felt. And of course, we asked students about this on our surveys in the first year, and they told us that they felt like our math assessments were really hard, right, compared to what they were experiencing in their classroom. So we ramped up the rigor there, and I think in a way that we weren't doing the same kind of transition with writing as we were bringing that in. We really just kind of flipped the switch for math. And so that means that we're going to have to make some adjustments in terms of how we expose our educators and our students to these new expectations that we have in our math courses. So we have in high school math 2 pathways, what we call the traditional pathway or track, which is the Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, And then we also have this integrated math track, which is where geometry content is actually included in all 3 courses. So we have about 18 districts in the state who've transitioned to that integrated math pathway. And so that continues to happen in terms of districts who are transitioning, and they're kind of rolling up with having freshmen last year take integrated math 1, and then their sophomores are taking integrated math 2, and it will probably be another couple of years before that stabilizes. So we really are focusing for math on the overall high school math growth to have kind of an apples to apples comparison, because when you think about the movement between which districts are participating in the traditional track versus the integrated math track, you're going to see some noise in those results until we get to stability. I don't think we should draw any conclusions at this point around one pathway is better than the other. I think that it'll be a few years before we have evidence as to whether or not those adjustments around the integrated math track have done what we believe, which is it just has a more, I think, a coherent way to introduce that math content across the high school courses, and we're still at the beginning of that transition. So 4 of the 6 math exams, we increased the percent of students who were on track or mastered. We noticed that in integrated math 2 and integrated in algebra 2, rather, we saw slight dips. But as I also noted, we also saw the number of students taking those tests fluctuate because of this transition between districts choosing which pathway that they participate in. So across all high school math courses, we had 21.5% of students performed on track or mastered, up slightly from 20.8%, which means that 4,000 more students scored on track or mastered, and about 7,000 more students scored approaching this year compared to last year. So here are our graphics around math. And so you can see this is the traditional pathway, Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. And as we noted, you see what we have been discussing in terms of the rigor of math means that we have a lot of work to do to move more students into that approaching on-track, mastered categories of performance from the below category. But we have a lot of optimism that we will get there, and we have some plans in terms of how we're going to focus energies to support educators and students this year. This is the integrated math pathway. So you can see integrated math 1 at the top of the graphic, integrated math 2 and math 3. We've talked internally at the department about introducing more of these what we call item writing workshops, and going out and doing them in our 3 regional grand divisions, where we invite educators to actually learn about how we create items for the TN Ready assessment, have them engage in actually writing items themselves, and we actually use those items to incorporate into our operational test. But what the great benefit of that is that teachers walk away with a better understanding of the mindset of how do I create a task in my classroom that I know will be at the level of rigor and expectations that they will experience on the TN Ready assessment. So when we introduced those item writing workshops last year, we got great response from educators saying that this was really beneficial professional development. And so we feel like having more of those, particularly around math content, and bringing more educators into those this year will be helpful, as well as introducing more practice tools and resources for students, including the classroom assessment builder, which is where teachers will be able to access an item bank and create their own quizzes, if you will, and their own formative assessment using items that are very similar to what they will experience, students will experience in TN Ready. So then in talking about science, as we noted, in biology and chemistry, we have not yet made that transition to the next generation assessment or to our new standards. So this is based on our old TCAP model, so the performance levels are still our old below basic, basic, proficient, and advanced. And we did see improvement with students across both biology and chemistry subjects. You all may know too that we talked about that we actually did set a time limit on the EOC exams for that historical TCAP that we introduced last year, and so we continue to have that time limit that we've introduced, but we do see students improving. We went from 48.9% last year who were proficient or advanced to 51% this year, which means that we had about 4,600 more students who were at or above expectations, and about 1,500 more students moved up to the second performance level, which is basic. And so here are the results in detail for biology at the top of the graph, and then chemistry is the second content area. And so finally, when looking at U.S. history, we reintroduced our U.S. history assessment, having totally revamped that assessment and introduced a writing component to U.S. history. That exam is very much shifted from where we were historically, where it was a lot of recall of dates and events. And now this is more about putting history knowledge in context for students and being able to write and bring that information together in an assessment. So we also saw an uptick in the percentage of students who were on track or mastered this year, up to 30.8% in 2017 versus 29.9% last year, which means we had about 2,800 additional students who were meeting expectations of on track or mastered, and then about 2,800 more students who were approaching. And so here's the graphic for U.S. history. So let's talk a little bit about score reporting, and then we'll open it up for questions. With this release of our statewide EOC results, we now begin the cascade that you know that we do annually, where the next thing we do is expose districts to their district level results. We'll begin releasing that to districts in the next week or so. We give districts the opportunity to review their data before we then make that achievement data public. We will also be shipping out to districts their individual student reports for EOC for fall and spring, as well as their school and district reports. Later on in the month of August, we'll also roll out our TVAS growth data to districts, and that would be for both 3.8 and EOC, because even though we'll talk a little bit about the timeline for 3.8 achievement results, you all know that TVAS is a growth model, so it does not require the achievement levels that we'll be setting next month with you for grades 3.8. So in speaking about grades 3.8, we just finished a standard setting with those teacher committees in the last week or so. And so we will be coming to the State Board of Education next month, I think it's the week of August 21st, to present to you recommendations for cut scores in grades 3 through 8. And we actually have a series of cut scores that we'll be presenting. We will have TN ready for ELA and math for grades 3.8. We'll also have the second grade assessment, which was optional for ELA and math, and an alternate assessment for second grade. And then we'll also be bringing the alternate assessment for grades 3 through 8 in high school in social studies and science. So we have a Tennessee design alternate assessment for social studies and science. Students are participating in the MSAA assessment for ELA and math in terms of our alternate students, which is for those students who have the most severe cognitive disabilities, the 1% of students in that category. And also to remind you, this is what our score reports will look like, both for grades 3.8 when we get there in the fall, and our high school EOC. We've gotten lots of positive feedback from the field about these updated score reports and what they mean in terms of being able to interpret student performance. You can see there in front of you the fine print around how we define each of our performance levels, and we put in context for students how that compared to the rest of the state, their school, and the district. And then the second page gets into more details of what we think is actionable information for educators and families around how students performed on certain domains and what that means in terms of strengths and areas for improvement, as well as next steps that they can pursue to try to maintain or bolster their results in the future. We also have classroom roster reports that we're introducing for educators. We rolled those out last year, and so they'll get this information where they can see how their entire class did on the assessment and the performance levels for those classes and the domain scores. And then this is one that we get lots of great feedback from educators that we think is really important. It's the standards level report. And so the standards level report shows an educator how did their students perform on this individual standard, and they can compare their class to the school, the district, and the state. It's able to show a teacher where they had areas of real strength and where there may need to be areas where they focus. And we really believe that the power of these standards analysis reports will become even greater as we start to implement the Assessment Transparency Act, where we're able to release more and more questions beginning in the 17-18 school year. We hope to be be able to get to that point where we're releasing 50 to 60% of our tests so that educators can actually see the questions that were asked, compare this to the standards analysis report, and then students will be able to see question by question how they responded. So we think all of that is going to really supercharge the instructional value of the results that we're getting back from TN Ready. So I'll stop there for questions.
Okay, questions for Dr. Townley? Okay, Lillian?
I do. First of all, I do want to say that I'm excited to see the results and that we're moving the needle in the right direction. But because of talking to a lot of people in the field and a lot of very passionate teachers and what they do day in and day out, and they care deeply about every measure that we utilize to gauge their success. And certainly TN Ready is one that they care a lot about. And so a couple of questions, and I think, you did articulate this beautifully as you always do, but I still have concern about the TN Ready test truly mapping to the standards that the teachers are teaching. And when you look at math and you see the challenge that we have moving the needle farther along because we haven't made the same kind of gains there, I am concerned about whether or not the standards are lining up or are the teachers teaching the standards. There could be a disconnect, and I think we need to be investigating further what's going on. But I have some concern that perhaps more work needs to be done. So I was pleased to hear you say that there are plans to bring teachers in, and I would hope that that would be across the board. I don't know what it would take to do that, but perhaps you can share with us a little bit more about that. And what can you share with us regarding your confidence that the standards are in alignment with
Sure.
TN Ready?
So let me start with your second question, and then we'll go into specific plans of how we support educators. So one of the ways that we ensure standards alignment is that, frankly, we have educators vet the questions for standards alignment. So at each phase of the process, we have what we call item review committees. And in fact, one of them is going to launch in a couple of weeks in mid-August, where we bring educators in and they actually look at every item that we would consider for our TN Ready assessment. And so teachers are looking first for standards alignment. They're looking for the clarity of the question. They're making sure that if it's a multiple choice questions, are the answers appropriate in terms of their appropriate distractors? Do we make sure that we have only one correct answer that we can all agree with? And so teachers get to make a decision as to whether or not they want to revise or reject or accept an item as it is. And so if teachers reject an item and say that this doesn't seem to be aligned to standards, it's not clear enough, or it seems to be inappropriate because the context, like it would be something that a Tennessee student might not understand, conceptually, if it's a question, let's say, about Arkansas, who knows, right? So teachers get to make those decisions, and that's really how we quality control that we do have a standards aligned assessment, because we have educators that we draw from across the state to actually confirm that they agree that this is a question that reflects the standards as it's been noted, and that they think it's a high quality question. We do open recruiting for that item review. So we send out blast emails and open up an application process to educators across the state, and we typically end up having about 200 educators over the course of the year being able to vet that information. Your second question around how folks in the field are engaging with the assessment and engaging with the standards. Here's the thing, we know this, that even though we started this transition with the adoption of new standards in 2010, until you have an aligned assessment, it's not tangible in terms of what do I mean just by the words written within that standard. The task is what brings the standard alive. And frankly, the assessment questions, that is the task. And so as an educator, it becomes more tangible for me to be able to see the assessment item, read that standard, and now there's an aha moment in terms of, okay, this is how I need to be teaching this concept. This is the expectation for students. And as I noted, we really did make a dramatic shift with math. We did, in a way that wasn't phasing in along the way, in the same thing that we did in the same way that we did for English language arts. And so we now know we've got to do more in terms of making sure that folks understand what it is that's being asked of them. We also shouldn't forget that in math, we actually rolled out a new assessment. We weren't assessing geometry. That's brand new. And anytime you, for the first time, start to assess a content area, there are many aha moments where folks are like, oh, I now see what this meant, what this standard meant. I now am more closely aligning because we've now defined what the criteria is in a way that we hadn't before for geometry. So geometry, the integrated math series, those are all new courses. So I do think that we believe that we're just at a point where we need to put more investment and have more time in terms of patience for the field to respond and for us to provide more resources and for there to be that continuing adjustment around the expectations for the math courses. Commissioner?
Yeah, I would add one thing, because when we have the 3A results in the fall, you're also going to see that there is this shift in 3A that we have spent a lot of time with, that we're going to be spending more time with over the next few months, around what's the expectation of fluency of understanding, basically mental math, right? Things that you know and you can apply, but there's an expectation that you know it, and you know it pretty quickly, right? You're not having to actually do the calculation. You can get an estimated moment to get to the right answer based on what the options are. And there were lots of questions we had, even from our teacher advisory council, our governor's teachers cabinet, our multiple advisory groups, that have said, I feel like we needed more from a 3A perspective on what that expectation was. I read the standard. Now that I've seen the questions I get, that I probably should have been doing more on that middle math fluency side and really pushing that conversation forward in my classroom in ways that I didn't do. And so we've seen that in 3A. So you'll see that, I'm assuming, when we get those results. And so we will have some all hands on deck. We just put out some material yesterday, actually, and an update to our directors, and we will do that in a way to our educators that really shares what is that subpart around fluency of math really saying, and what are the expectations, and we are clarifying that, showing examples. And I love the document and the new work that we're doing on that. We're showing them actual examples of questions of this is what the expectation looks like, and if your kids can't really do that, then you probably need to think differently about your instructional process, your rigor, and your planning and the materials, the alignment of the materials you're using to get there. So great question, and we still feel like, particularly in math, we have work to do in that area.
And then I'm thinking too, with the start of the school year, some schools are starting, I think, Monday. How much work still needs to be done to have the high degree of confidence that you want, that we all want, that this year will move the needle much farther in the right direction? So how much preparation do we need to do with these teachers, and how are you going about that? So are there professional development that's happening now, happening during the summer, coming up, all those kinds of things?
Yeah, we had 16,000 teachers engaged in math training this summer through our standards training, and then they are re-delivering back into their districts. So from the standards piece all the way to new information on this math subpart, we'll do some webinars and associated regional meetings around 3A math, in particular the item writing workshops we're scaling up. So fall is all hands on deck with a variety of pieces. Now that they have results, this is very meaningful. All right, they're going to have TVOS during the month of August, so there's some meaningful information that they have right now, even while we're in this transition phase. Thank you.
Wendy?
So you may have heard that there's a lot of noise around testing right now. And I was being sarcastic, but there's a lot of complaining about testing, a lot of complaining about TN Ready. I've had the opportunity to hear from a lot of parents, and what I'm learning is that parents, by and large, think testing is important. The problem is that they don't see the connection between that testing and what happens after. And so you have parents who tell me, you know, my kid gets pretty stressed about a test in April, May, early May. They take the test, you know, the whole school locks down. They take these tests, and then there's a month left of school, and then they go off to summer, and then they start a new classroom with a new teacher, and then they're 3 months in, and then they get their results. And so I understand new standards, new tests, that October is when they could expect to get them this year. Is there any plan moving forward for there to be a closer connection between the taking of the test and children and parents getting the results so they can feel like they're doing something with it?
Sure. I mean, I think this came out of our assessment task force work, both the first assessment task force and 2.0, that we need to accelerate the reporting of results. And I think you all have heard me say this before, that the way that we do that is that we really got to get to the transition to online. We are limited by paper, pencil, and all of the processing that goes with that, right? You've got to get it back to the vendor. The vendor has to scan all the paper documents. And oh, by the way, our answer documents are no longer just one-page Scantron sheets that you and I remember from school. They're 8-page documents that have student answers written into them, as well as multiple choice and graphing items, etc. So it's just really a lot more processing when I think about a million tests times 8 pages times I can't start until the box gets there. Right. So part of our efficiency play is transitioning to online as quickly as we can. The other piece of that, of course, is that we still have these human scored items. Like, we're going to score the writing items. We're going to score these constructive response items, and that means a person has to look at it. So all that said, we do know that next year we expect for results to be back earlier, that we would be in a summer time frame where educators and districts could have those individual student reports more in that summer, July, before the return to school time frame. But we still do leave it to districts in terms of how they distribute those reports to parents. Right. And then there's a second notion of this expectation, and this came out in one of our assessment task force recommendations too, in terms of what do teachers do with that information the next year, and how do they engage with it with parents, and how do we use it for instructional planning and individual planning for a student. And I think that that's work that we've got to do to kind of change the culture around talking about the state assessment. And I'll hit on one other item, and the commissioner and I have this conversation all the time. Part of, I think, perhaps, the reason why it's harder to have a conversation about the T and Ready results is that, frankly, all of our grading isn't standards-based grading. So it's very difficult to have a conversation when there's a disconnect with the report card grade and the student performance on T and Ready. And that's something that we've got to work with our directors of school and with our core office to think about. How do we bridge that gap? How do we talk about student performance on the assessment? How do we make sure that classroom grading does have a reflection of standards mastery so that we aren't having to talk about these disconnects between the two?
Thank you. I mean, I'm just encouraged. I'm happy to hear that you guys are having that conversation. Parents want to be with you on this.
Yep.
I mean, despite what you're hearing from a few loud people, they really do. And I think if they feel like they're getting, the test is useful for them and their children, then they'll be with you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Sarah?
That's a good segue. I just have one kind of double barrel quick question, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about, I mean, I love that we have results and we've been spending most of our morning looking at the numbers, but just in terms of how the administration of the test went this year, and you mentioned the online component, and I know we're hopeful that more schools and districts will be going online next year, but I mean, I think it's easy to forget this time last year. I mean, the big question was, you know, administration. So I'd love to hear just sort of some of the things you learned there. And then the second part is just about the communications moving into this next year, now that we've got a little bit of a ground game, both to parents and to educators and to districts about sort of the testing plan for this year.
You want to start? Or
no, I'll start by saying I was actually reflecting on where we were last year, probably at this meeting. So, you know, a year later, we can say we had a very strong positive administration time period. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get the raw scores to every district at the time where they were getting the results within that 5-day window that the law has in place. And so some folks did actually hold their report cards to include raw score data. And that goes back to the comment that Dr. Townsend made around, you know, we've got schools getting out for 3 weeks during the month of May and the first part of June. So they're getting out of school in a 3-week window. They were actually mailing, you know, their documents to us on different timelines. And then we unfortunately had our vendor make a very poor decision time-wise to change software for their scanning equipment. And that created a really quick delay that we had. It really didn't put us too far behind, but any delay on a tight timeline is felt. And so we are making significant adjustments to make sure that we don't have that type of moment that we had after a really strong administration. And then it was that unfortunate time period that we were trying to create these quick adjustments to move districts to have their raw score data. But then we really had a strong summer in terms of getting information back and forth between our vendor and certainly the department, and then ensuring that our districts are going to get information through high-quality score reports that they can use for their families and for their teachers, and that will continue to go forward. To the online question, I would say briefly, we will be moving all of our high schools to online this year, and we've already started a Ready for TN Ready. That's actually what we're calling it, Ready for TN Ready technology process to ensure that there is readiness on the tech side for every high school. And a lot of districts have said, it went so well last year when I moved to online, I want to move my middle schools and potentially my elementary to go ahead and transition to online. And the more folks who do have transition this year, if you have that really strong readiness, the better it's going to be, where we don't have that scanning moment and that delivery moment that just quite frankly puts you behind with such a different kind of test in terms of the number of pages that are being scanned and amount of hand scoring that has to do that. So we're very hopeful that the online transition this year will speed everything up. And remember, we're not going through standard setting again. So there is a speed up that just happens when you've gotten through this transition.
Okay, other questions? Lisa?
Yeah, just to build on that, which is very exciting, because like when you think about like I believe on the SAT now, right, they get the score right then. They take it online. Someone correct me. Isn't this true now?
It depends on whether they're taking the writing portion. So
Right.
any test that has a writing portion, then you typically have a delay. But
And maybe
some that
the-
don't, you get it.
Yeah, on even the graduate school exams as well. Like I feel like now it's almost instant. I mean, it can be instantaneous. So assuming that that's like the holy grail, and that's what we would want, because I am sort of curious. Like if I know that must sound like a ridiculous ambition in this time and place, but it does seem like something we should get to, because I do think the implications on timing are huge. So for example, I'm working with a charter network, and only because they're the only ones with the autonomy to do this, but they have a real problem, just like everyone else in public education, on teacher retention. And one of the levers they're trying to pull is around teacher compensation. And if they have the results in real time, you could actually say, oh my gosh, Sarah, she is a killer teacher. We know it like the day after the results are out. We're going to give her $10,000 extra to make sure she stays next year. I mean, there are massive like implications, but by the time right now, this poor network, they get the data so far. I mean, people have to make commitments before we even know the results. And I just think there's lots of interesting other policy and other actions tied to this, in addition to the very valuable, you know, parent and family and, you know, community lever. So that's one thought. But at some point, I would love to, I mean, it just seems like it is like technically possible. And I know it may sound crazy in this environment, but I would love to see that happen.
And we 100% agree. Again, as we transition to online, that becomes much more of the reality. And quite frankly, it also allows us then to make those higher level policy decisions that districts are trying to make, the state, certainly schools.
It'd be fascinating. I mean, it would drive, I think, lots of changes, or at least interesting conversations about potential change. So switching gears, I have actually questions around distribution. So I was wondering, like, so if we look at the charts that say, okay, you know, if we have 4,000 additional students, you know, that jumped into higher buckets, or 11,000, and thank you for putting the raw numbers. I think that's important to keep our eye on. So my question is, like, is it a standard 80-20 application? In other words, is it like 20% of the schools are producing 80% of those results, or like what's the split? Or if it's not 80-20, it's like just like flat across. So all my questions are on distribution and where that growth is coming from. And then are there assuming that I'm guessing, I mean, if I had to just, I'm guessing that it's probably something like 80-20. I might be over 30-70 or something like that, 70-30. But assuming that is the case, like it's not evenly distributed. Like there is some kind of like real split, then I'm curious about what distinguishes the groups that made progress. Like, is it urban? Is it rural? Is it like, you know, like what are the characteristics?
So this is a great question, and I will say for part of it, I think we can dig into later when we've actually released the district and school results, because we could talk about this in more detail, right? But I think by and large, we do see across the state like pockets of success, evidence of success. I wouldn't say that we could characterize that universally it's rural districts that do better than urban districts or vice versa, right? So as we would call it, the between school differences are there, and they're widespread. We will see that that we're going to have places that had real pops and gains, right? And we're going to want to know what did they do differently. These real bright spots around what might they have been doing in terms of curricular choices, in terms of instructional choices that are all local decisions that may give us some hint towards, oh, well, these decisions seem to yield better learning outcomes for students, and why not share those broadly? So we will be digging into that data, but I think that on the one hand, we do see success, across the state, and I wouldn't be able to say that it's about characteristics that are demographic characteristics, but I think what will happen is that we'll see patterns in terms of decisions that are made that impact learning outcomes that we can take away that can be applied in multiple contexts.
That would be a fascinating future meeting, is to look at the bright spots and what really does distinguish the drivers, the growth. And then what was my other? Oh, I got so excited when I saw the class. I mean, on page 10, well, on my page 10, the sub-scores, like all the sub-score categories, and then, you can see it by student, and then you can see the class roster. I mean, gosh, I would kill for this when I was teaching. It's like amazing. So my question is around the school level. Like, is there equivalent? I'm sure there is for school. Yes. And how, what is the distribution? Is that widely available? I mean, eventually, or?
So when you say, is it widely? Yes. So all of this is available to schools in an electronic platform from the vendor. It's called Nextera. They'll be interacting with that to get all of these reports in a PDF format. We actually print a copy of the individual student report and send a printed copy of that can go home to parents. What we have found is this: in the absence of every educator having their own login to that system, we have relied with a previous vendor on the building administrator has access. And we're hoping that the building administrator distributes that information. We found that that doesn't happen the way that we would expect it to or want it to in every scenario. So our goal is to make sure that educators have their own access to be able to see their information for their classroom, even if they can't see it, for another person's classroom, but they can see, their information and that information for their school, and then, their district-wide results. So we are in the process of setting up what those user account access looks like, and being able to make sure that we get all educators their individual access to look at their reporting. And then ultimately we want to get to a place where we have more dynamic reporting. Like, these are our static reports, but we know there are many educators who would love to be able to manipulate their data to look at certain things, certain trends. And so to your point, when we think about, in this future state where we have this instantaneous data, we also want it to be very dynamic. And that's what we're working towards with our vendor, is this future state that makes this very flexible data, that's very accessible, and that educators are in control individually of being able to leverage that data for their own use.
Got it.
Okay.
And when I say widely available, though, I mean the school level data. So if I'm teaching at Ross Element, I mean, sorry, if I'm a parent in the neighborhood, can I look it up?
So technically, we do not have anyone who's outside of an employee that has access to our Nextera platform with our vendors. What will ultimately happen is that people will be able to see this data as we update to our report card and our new A through F grading framework, that they'll be able to get more individual data. So we haven't traditionally made school level reports available outside of the vendor platform. I think that's something that we would talk through in terms of what that would look like. Of course, we're very sensitive of any information that includes student level data. So those class rosters would only be for that teacher, right?
Yeah.
But yes, we could talk about, in terms of some of the roll-up data, what that might look like and how we might be able to give more public access. But right now, it's really private access to educators.
Yeah.
Okay. Good discussion. And I think, we do have a hard stop here at 4 o'clock today, and we're going to need to move on. I think it's, very evident that most of our concern is trying to speed up the reporting results. I think that is terribly important, and also the format that it comes in that you talk about. I also think that the item writing workshop are very important to make sure that we've got good understanding between the Ready and the standards that we have here, and I think that's an important step to make that happen.
So I want to mention something that unfortunately we did not mention already, and it is very significant. Most of you know we have something called the Assessment Transparency Act. That is a big shift in our culture around testing. Not only are these item writing workshops where teachers are engaging in actually writing the test questions, but we're also shifting, or next year, the vast majority, because remember we're in this transition, so we have a lot of field test items and linking items, but we will have the vast majority of our questions published in the field with students that, answers. So parents will be able to see the questions and the answers the students gave through this transition that we're in. And that will create a lot of transparency around this whole process that has never been part of the culture in Tennessee. And after we get past this year, we've had this 2-year transition phase, we're going to be in a really strong place for the availability of questions to both families and to educators.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, good job. Now move to the Governor's Council for the Education of Students with Disabilities report on constraint and isolation data. And Chip Fair is here. Chip, welcome back.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to thank the board for the opportunity to come visit you again this year and present the recommendations from the Advisory Council for the Education of Students with Disabilities. Since I was here last year, we have received one more year of data from the state, and that is included in the attachments of the report that you have in your packet. As you know, state law requires local school systems to report regarding isolation and restraint to the State Department of Education every year. The State Department of Education in turn shares that data with the Governor's Advisory Council, who then analyzes it and presents to you recommendations that you as the state board may use to establish policy or strategies or both to reduce or eliminate the use of isolation and restraint in schools. This year, our recommendation is the same as last year, that we need more understanding of the restraint and isolation law in the school systems, so that we will therefore get more effective and appropriate implementation of it, so that the data that we receive will be more accurate. In other words, the data that we've received is not felt to accurately reflect what's really happening. In other words, we have reports of some reports of restraint and isolation that would not under the law have been restraint or isolation, so they're doing it inappropriately. We have reports of times when it should have been done. We've had reports of times that it wasn't reported. So we don't have clean data. So our recommendation is to do a Q&A document that will explain the law to the school systems, explain to them what it says, why they do it, and when they restrain and isolate. In other words, if we get cleaner data, then we can make substantive decisions based upon it. And that was our recommendation and still is. The State Department of Education, quite a while back, formed a task force to basically analyze the same data. And I'm on that task force representing the Governor's Advisory Council, and that task force has been working diligently and is working on a Q&A document, which we had a meeting not 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I would say within the near future, they may bring something and present to you for your consideration. And of course, it will be up to you to adopt that as your policy or your strategy from here. Once we start getting better data, then we can start making better decisions. And that's our recommendation. Any questions?
Question for Chip?
When you say a Q&A document, you mean a survey of
Good question.
those folks within the
No, what I mean Q&A is sort of the task force comes up with a question and then answers it. Like, what in the law does not constitute a restraint? And then the answer would be what's in the law, so the school systems understand what is a restraint, what isn't a restraint, when you do it, when you don't do it.
Okay, Wendy?
So I can start with a whole issue of concerns about the fact that people who are in the school system who are tasked with this don't understand the law on isolation and restraint.
Mm-hmm.
As somebody who's represented kids who have been isolated and restrained, it's not that complicated, in my opinion, to understand what constitutes isolation or restraint under the law. But I do think, something, if they don't, then we need to make sure that they do.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree that some sort of frequently asked questions document something. So a couple questions. You mentioned that there's already a group working on this document.
The State Department of Education has a task force that is working on a document.
Okay. Do you know how many parents of students with disabilities are on that task force?
I
Or working on that
honestly
document?
do not, but I'm pretty sure there are. Allison, do you know?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Allison Gall, heading that task force. We do have one parent that serves regularly, but we have 2 others that are part of the conversation.
Out of how many people on the task force?
There's only 8.
Okay. 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 And so your proposal is that you put this document together and come back in front of the board for us to say that this should be used? Or-
Not that the advisory council puts it together. We're recommending what we think should be done.
Right.
We're recommending a question and answer document to help people understand the law and apply it appropriately. It's up to the board to decide who they want to empower to do it. And the Department of Education has already, taken that on. And when they report back to y'all, if you want to accept that, then it's done in short order.
Okay. What, do we have any more definition around the timeline for the task force that's working on this?
Don't know. Allison, what's your idea?
Yeah, so
Allison, why don't you come up?
I'm sorry, okay.
Hi. Yeah, so the timeline's actually really good, like, best I could give you. It's in communications, it should be back sometime today or tomorrow. Once it is finally through our communications process and I do the edits, which I would imagine, given the number of legal vetting that we've had, would be fairly minimal. It will be posted on a newly created website that just got approved as well today. So we are at the best place I could possibly report for timeline. It's within a week or 2 tops.
What do you mean? I'm going to ask her a question. Do you mean it's going to be up and out there, or it's going to be back for the board for them to?
No, it's up and out. The FAQ is complete in communications, and we're just waiting for the final edits.
Okay.
Can I just ask some, so who is that directed towards? Who's tasked with the reporting? Somebody at each school level, right?
Yes.
Okay, so who in the school, at the school level is tasked with reporting isolation and restraint incidents?
Sure.
Hey, I asked if you wanted me to answer that. Reporting is for students with IEPs. And
I
so
know
we
all
were
that.
able to link it to our IEP system. In our IEP system, we have user profiles of what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. Very early in that first year, we realized that having just anybody report was the highest chance of error. It also didn't allow for a check. And with the work of the task force, we agreed that it should be that education supervisor. Or special ed supervisor. So all the reports go to them in paper, which provides 2 things. 1, it's a minimal risk in our data. 2, they're looking at what's happening in their district to add that second check that we'd never had before. It also gives us just a single point of contact for this kind of discussion.
So that's the coordinator at the district level.
Yes.
Who at the so a child is locked in a room and they weren't supposed to be, right? They have an IEP. Who at the school is tasked with with filling out that paperwork that then goes to the
The
coordinator?
person who did the restraint gives it to the special education supervisor, their principal, and the parent. It's required by law to inform the principal and the parent too.
So these 6,500 and all these thousands of incidents are actually self-reported isolation and restraint, not including if, like cases that I had, somebody was isolating and restraining and it got found out by accident. Okay. I mean, it's definitely a bigger problem.
You raise a point that is the exact point as to why we need this Q&A document to educate the school systems, because you said right then that there were school systems that didn't report for whatever reason. They need to report.
Would a more direct training or education requirement at the school level accomplish the same sort of outcome, just ensuring that those who are
caring
caring for children have an understanding of what's
The
lawful
school
and what's not.
the school systems are charged under state regulation with providing the training to their personnel. What this document will do is give them some more information and clarification. You know, prior to this, all they've had is the statute. And you read a statute, sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. This will help clarify and simplify the statute so that then school systems can take this document and build on it and have better informed employees.
Okay. Sounds like we've got a good plan moving forward here, and I guess I'm taken to understand that it is not something that needs to come back to the state board for approval. Is that assessment? I don't know why it would. It sounds like a good recommendation.
Well, all that I know is that once a year, we bring the recommendation to you, and the law says that the state board shall use these recommendations as well as data, documentation, and reports to establish policy or strategy or both to reduce or eliminate the use of isolation and restraint in schools.
So I want to say thank you, Mr. Fair, and certainly the task force for the work on this. If you are okay with it, we would like to put it out at ASAP as soon as next week. And so I'm looking to the board, if that is something that you're okay with, then we would go ahead and move that forward before we were waiting for another state board meeting. We would try to get that down to multiple audiences, both we have a commissioner's update that goes out to directors, we have a principal update, we have an educator update, so it would go to the various audiences that certainly would care about this and be empowered to do something different.
Well, I think we're fine with going forward with that, and I think it would be good to come back to our next meeting just with information item, what has been done. I think there's enough interest in this that we ought to do that.
I would request that we also, can we get provided a copy of that document when it goes out, like an email, just an email copy so we see what's going on?
I'm sure the state will provide it to you and it'll be posted.
That'd be great.
Good. Okay.
And, if the board's good with that, then let the state go with it. Okay. And of course, next year when I come back, or whoever comes back with the recommendation, it might be based upon the better data, and it might be a recommendation to change the Q&A document. Yeah. Because we're all in this together.
Great. Okay. Yep, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, we'll move on to the in-depth look at EPP annual reports and approval metrics. Mimi.
Good afternoon. I'm excited to be here today to share a little bit about the annual reports with you that we've been talking about for a long time related to educator preparation. I know the board is very familiar with the report cards that are actually produced by state board staff. And as you will recall, those report cards are public-facing documents that offer external stakeholders key information about educator preparation providers at a very aggregated level. So the data that's in those report cards currently provides information about things like placement rates and retention rates at the provider level. We knew that these report cards served a very specific purpose for our external stakeholders, but that what they didn't do was offer enough data to support continuous improvement for our educator preparation providers. And yet the data at that level that we wanted to provide to ed prep providers was probably way too granular for many of our external stakeholders. So we decided that it was important to have a report card as well as something that we call an annual report. And so the annual report, as you can see here, and you've probably seen this chart before, prioritizes outcomes and impact. So we make sure that we are focused on looking at indicators that give us great data about how completers are doing once they're in the field. It's also actionable for our preparation providers so that they can look at this data and really begin to dig in and think about changes that they might want to make to their programs. And I do use that word program specifically, different than provider. So they're thinking explicitly about their elementary education program or their secondary math program. And then finally, it incentivizes continuous improvement. So again, these annual reports will be the reports that we use every year, and you will get these reports that will tell you information about how every preparation provider is doing and how their programs within the provider are doing. And so they will have this information to make changes as they move forward, but it will also give us information that will allow us to intervene in the middle of that 7-year cycle if we need to. So what we want to do today, and Michael Derline is here with me, is walk you through the annual reports. I will say to you that this is our very first iteration of this, so we already have great ideas about how to improve them for next year, but we welcome your feedback and hope that you are excited to see them and that you have some good ideas for us as we move forward. And we produced these in March this year, and that will, our new cycle for report cards and annual reports will require that we publish those on, I believe it's February 15th each year. So that will be our next iteration of this report. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael to walk through this annual report.
Thanks, Amy. So as we all know, districts receive data at very granular levels. We had this conversation just a minute ago, and EPPs don't always have access to that data. So what we wanted to do was produce something that they could really dive into and better understand how their program's doing on various domains and on metrics at a very granular level. So what you see here is the first release of the annual reports. The 3 tabs or 4 tabs on the top represent different views that they have. So the first 3 represent more granular views as you go along the line, and the last tab is a user guide. And there are 5 domains, and you'll see some similarities between this and the State Board's report card: recruitment and selection, employment and retention, candidate assessment, satisfaction of completers, employers, and district partners, and then completer effectiveness. So this first tab that they're able to see, take a little time to load. This allows providers, and for the first time ever, they're able to see observation data for folks who are evaluated on the team rubric after they completed their program. So this is actually the most significant piece of data, we think, that we're giving back to providers, because it can very much inform the way that they incorporate teaching candidates how to question, for example. So what the provider can now do is see that if they're performing, how they're performing relative to the state. Are they below or above the state average? How did their data look year over year? And so this provider, for an example, kind of performs at or above the state average. But then what? Okay, cool. So the bubble that you see is the EPP, and the line that you see, the black line, represents the state average. And then what they can do is click on data detail and start to disaggregate the same data. So looking at observation data at the indicator level for, say, endorsement area programs. So they can now see how well are they doing once they get into how are their completers doing once they get into the classroom by program type. So I know this is a little tricky to see, but they can look at just their History 612 program. So they're now able to say what is driving that data at the EPP level, which endorsement programs are really pulling us down or bringing us up. They can also disaggregate this same data by program type, so undergraduate, post-bac degree, post-bac non-degree, clinical type, so student teaching, job-embedded internship, and then cluster of endorsement areas. And that's especially helpful for providers that have multiple endorsement areas with very low end counts. They can combine those and start to see how all their secondary programs are doing together. The last view, I'm not going to spend much time on this, but is a custom analysis that allows the provider to dig into various metrics across domains. So they can say they want to look at either program type and clinical type, or in this case, cluster and endorsement area. compare themselves to the state average. And then they can look at metrics across domains. So right now I'm changing it to a recruitment and selection metric. So the percent with undergraduate GPA of 2.75 or higher, the percentage of completers employed in the first year, and we'll just look at that. So they can now start to answer some critical questions about how do the outcomes for my program look compared to what who we're bringing into the program. So we are extraordinarily excited about this tool. We've gotten some really good feedback. As Amy suggested just a minute ago, we are definitely viewing this as a first release, but a good one. And we believe that every iteration after this is going to only improve on this, both on the tech side, the data visualization side, and the metrics that we're producing. So I know we're tight on time, but I'm happy to take any questions, comments, feedback.
Questions?
Not
There.
a question. I just want to sort of reinforce, again, they heard this morning about the report card we saw with the THEC Commission, sort of that version. I think it's just really powerful that we've got both of these reports now being produced in ways that are more clearly serving end users. So I think for programs, this is just like a golden egg, you know, it's like they've got so much data now that they can mine and really drive improvements. Now, their public report card can really be that public report. So I mentioned that this morning, that the ability to have this kind of a report frees us up to have that more public-facing report card. So I think they're going to work in tandem really well, and we appreciate your all's partnership with us.
And
Nice.
I did want to mention in the governor's cabinet yesterday, we had a chance to share this with groups of educators from across the state, and one of the educators got so excited about it and what the possibility would be for preparing new teachers for the field. But she asked in the question, did any other state have something like this? And the answer was really no. At this level of detail and information back, we are certainly leading the way. I think it's some of the strongest work that we have done to really become more transparent with our EPP. So this is exciting, and certainly it's been done in full partnership with the state board. So thank you.
I think it's, great work. And I think it's just tremendous amount of information here. It would be very useful to the providers out there. I think the challenge is get all of them to use it the way that it can effectively be used.
We've seen some providers develop data meetings and conversations around this file, and then we've also heard from providers that they've yet to open it. So that's kind of our next step, is to get some feedback on the tool itself, how they're using it, how they're not using it, and why.
Yep.
But unlike the report card, this data will really drive the approval decisions of this board
That's right.
about these programs. So
yep.
I'm guessing the programs that haven't opened it probably will be opening it.
Probably true.
So I may have missed it, but can we go out there and look at this report online now?
This is not public. So right now we're releasing this directly to EPPs. They also can't see each other's data.
Okay, other questions? Okay, good work. Thank you. Amy, you got some more?
I do.
Okay.
I think they're gonna switch back to the slides, but the rest of my presentation, is related to a change that we are making to our licensure policy that is based on some changes in federal law. As you are well aware, we are under a new federal law that replaced No Child Left Behind, the Every Student Succeeds Act. And with that law, we saw that, sorry, I'm trying to get back. Okay. The highly qualified requirement that had been in place went away under ESSA, and yet IDEA maintains that special education courses should be taught by an educator that holds an appropriate license and endorsement, and explicitly prohibits states from allowing emergency credentials in these areas, such as our permits and our waivers. And so as we began to think about this shift, we also wanted to consider making sure that we were making really smart decisions. And so what we are proposing is a new pathway that would allow an existing licensed educator who is interested in adding special education to their endorsement profile to be allowed to hold that provisional endorsement while they are enrolled in a preparation program. So this might sound to you somewhat like our job embedded pathway that allows educators to have a license while they're completing their training. In this instance, this is an educator who's already fully licensed, but who wants to add the special education endorsement. So they will get enrolled in a preparation program. That preparation program would recommend them for a license. And then the preparation program in the district where they will be working will ensure that they have a mentor assigned to them in their area of endorsement. So I just want to give you a moment to ask any questions about this if you have any, and I think that's it.
This is on our agenda for tomorrow, so sounds to me like it's a good way to deal with the requirements that we have out there.
Would you like me to prolong the meeting today or tomorrow?
What if I said neither? No.
I mean, I can talk about this Amy was kind enough to have a call with me, so we shortened but
Okay.
so we can do it
Go ahead.
tomorrow, whatever. I just have a couple questions and a couple of thoughts that
Okay.
she's already aware of, so I can do it tomorrow.
Okay.
I'll prolong this tomorrow.
Okay.
All right,
Okay.
I'll look forward to it.
Okay. Anybody else wants to prolong this meeting?
So they would have this provisional status for a 3-year period?
Yes, great question, and I should have said that. Yes, it would be limited for 3 years. It could be no more than 3 years. If they don't complete all requirements within 3 years, then the endorsement will fall off of the license, and they won't be able to get a special education endorsement until they actually fully complete all requirements.
Okay.
What about the testing? Will they have to take the special ed like praxis?
No, and I mean, I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on that. So special education is different than a content area, right? And so it's really difficult to bring that content knowledge, at the beginning of a preparation program. And so this provision would allow them to complete those assessments within the 3-year period. But happy to hear your feedback on that.
Okay. Very good. Wendy, we'll look forward to your questions tomorrow. Okay, anything else? Okay. Amy, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
That was record time.
As you recognize from our agenda material, we've made some significant changes in our social studies standards relative to how we're going to handle Tennessee history, and Representative Art Swan has been very heavily involved in that, and he's asked to speak to us today. So, Art, welcome. Look forward to your comments.
I'm supposed to wear this.
Yes, you're right.
If I can get it.
Where'd Mackenzie go?
My hands are greasy.
Mackenzie's our.
I got it.
I got it. Just need you to come up here.
Yep.
Yeah.
I wanted to take a minute just to address you all because I know there was a lot of conversation about the Tennessee history class and what went on in the General Assembly and what the mindset was. And I think that if we look back in our history a little bit, it tells us a lot about where this came from. A lot of us went through Tennessee history as a class when we were in school. And it was an important part of where we ended up. And that's why I ended up where I am now. I think the General Assembly, if you look at the vote, it was unanimous in both houses. You see that it was very important to us. And we think it's very important to Tennesseans. Kids that don't have a classroom that they land in, they don't put as much value in that course, I don't think. If they don't start there and they don't come into a classroom and they just get their information out of embeddedness of a course, it just not the same. They just think it's not as serious to them. And I had some, well, I guess what I want to do is take the remainder of my time to answer a few questions. Getting up here and talking is a good thing, and saying whatever's on my mind is a good thing, I suppose. But I'm more concerned about how you feel about what went on, and whatever questions you have about that. And I'd love to respond to those if I've got a minute to do that. So if I could open it up for discussion for a minute, I'd like to do that.
Okay.
Commissioner, you certainly can ask a question too if you want to.
Sarah?
I'll start with one, Representative Swan, and thank you again for being with us today. I know Nathan and I were able to speak with you a couple different times during session, so I'm really grateful that you're willing and able to be with us today in person. In a minute, I'm going to talk to the board a little bit about where we are now with final reading on the social studies standards. And in particular, I'll talk about where this Tennessee history course has been placed in the second half of 5th grade. And I know we've had a couple different conversations with you about the various sort of options that our educators that came together to help us make that determination about the placement of the course, the things that they had to consider, and how we decided on 5th grade, and again, the sort of complicated process that also entailed. I'd just love you to talk a little bit about sort of your feelings about 5th grade and how we talked about the trade-offs and the decision there.
Well, I'm not real crazy about 5th grade, and I'll tell you why I'm not. I think you almost need to be maturing toward adulthood to comprehend your history. And to start at a level, we were at 7th grade when I took it. And I think that's just the beginning of being a teenager and beginning to understand the world around you and thinking about what you want to do when you get an age that you go into the employment and whether you want to go on to college. And those are all things that are going on in your mind at that age. When you're in 5th grade, you know, it's more about recess and when I'm going to get out and play and those kinds of things than a really serious thought about what's important in your life and why you are where you are and who got you there. And so that's kind of my thought process about 7th grade or 8th grade or even 6th grade for that matter. But I'm sure I'm not the only one here that probably has that feeling.
Just to kind of add on that, I mean, one of the things we've talked about in our conversations is the reason middle school became challenging is because of the world history content that would be eliminated if you put it in 6th or 7th grade. So I know we've had a number of one-on-one conversations with our members, but ensuring that we still have a focus in 8th grade on Tennessee history seems to be very important, given, again, your feelings about middle school being a more ideal developmental sort of period for this course. We thought the second half of 5th grade was sort of the best we could do in terms of getting it to a place where it's still developmentally appropriate and allows for a lot of hands-on exploration of Tennessee history in the form of field trips and other things that can happen in the elementary grades but are more challenging in the middle grades, but also then making sure that we still have a real focus in 8th grade on the Tennessee history standards. Try to take those considerations into account.
Okay.
So, I've got a quick question.
Great.
So what you just said, the Tennessee history, it comes back, like he said in 5th grade, you know, you're not as susceptible to really retaining all that information. So I know in 8th grade you do like an American history, the pre-Civil War. Right. It does go back and refocus on the Tennessee history.
That's right. So through that national lens, there's a real focus on Tennessee history in 8th grade, and then also in U.S. history in high school. And then we also now have an elective course that's available on Tennessee history for the high school level if students choose to take that. Great question.
Okay, Allison?
Do I understand tomorrow's the final reading?
Yes, yes.
Well, I would like to amend 8.62. And I would like to move that tomorrow to read as it is, but add also the geographical divisions within the state.
With an eye towards Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can we get that to everyone, you know, the item that you're
Yes, it's located, I don't know if everybody has a hard copy. It's in
Yeah.
IVC.
What's the number?
IVC.
Say again. IVC.
Sorry.
And then the standard, we can get this from you, Allison, but just to be clear, the standard that you're wanting to amend is 8.62. So we'll get the new language that you are proposing out for all the members.
Okay.
I would like to say something specifically to Representative Swan. If one, the passion that we experienced when we came to talk to legislators before the vote was made was very evident. And I want to personally thank you for the individual conversations that we had on this topic and how you were very clear on the desire and the why behind what ultimately ended up passing. And we appreciate the strong message that you quite frankly sent through this work, and then we were able to, I think, use that to move forward with some real clarity on what the goals were, what the intent was, and so we appreciate you continuing to have really open communication with us throughout that process. So I want to just personally and publicly thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate those comments. Sometimes I can be a bull in a china shop. And I hope I wasn't too much that way when you were there. I know I get.
We had good give and take.
Yes, we did. We did. And I've looked back through some of the information I've gotten since that time and about the embedded process. And I am impressed with parts of it about how it brings back in things that should be there. The thing that I think the course does is it sets the table for those things to be addressed that second time for an opportunity for the retention of it to occur. Without that, I think you really lose an awful lot of it. And that's why I was so concerned about the fifth grade. I know the restraints you're under and where you're trying to go with. If I'd have been the guy in charge and I could have anything I wanted, I would have pushed world history over and I would have pushed Tennessee history in front of it, because I think the reason for that is it's more relevant to the world in which these kids are born into and more relevant about the things they see along the side of the road or in their backyard or at the football stadium or wherever. You know, the history is all around us. And I told the story on the floor about my neighborhood and how Sherman encamped there before he took Knoxville. And, you know, most people don't realize that, but when they learn that in history and it becomes their neighborhood, it has a very positive effect on them, and they become very interested in knowing more and more about it. That farm happens to be a land grant farm also. And, you know, Maryville College is there in my neighborhood, and it's 1812. They don't have any idea about the Presbyterians coming in and setting up the college and establishing the town. And those are the kinds of things that really stick with them, because they see them every day as they drive by, and they play on them and so forth. So, you know, that's where my passion comes from. Is it comes from the familiarness of the environment and not understanding what that environment came from and why we have it for what use it's being used for.
Great. Okay, Representative Swan, we certainly appreciate you being with us. I certainly echo the comments that Ben just made. That I certainly appreciate your interest in this subject, and I think we're coming up with a good product here, and I'm just continue to be impressed with the review process that we've gone through and the amount of educators we've gotten involved in it and so forth. And I think that we've gotten real strong commitment, good standards and strong commitment throughout the state for how important these standards are.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move to the 2:30 item, which is World History and Social Studies Standards. Sarah.
Thank you, Chairman, and I will try to keep this brief because we have just covered some of the content that I was going to share with you, but particularly for some of our new members, I want to talk a little bit about the standards review process. So most of you know, but there is a really comprehensive review process that the state of Tennessee now utilizes for our 4 core academic areas. And social studies is the last of the 4 to go through this sort of comprehensive review process, starting with the public website that opened, in this case, back in January of 2016. It was open for several months. We collected record numbers of reviews in that first public posting of the current social studies standards. Once those comments came down at the end of that first review period, we had our educator teams from across the state come together, teams of 25, both K-12 and higher ed representatives in those teams, to review that public feedback and make the first round of revisions on our current standards. Again, this is standard practice now across these 4 academic areas, but after that stage happens, then the revised standards go back to the public website for additional comment. And again, we saw for social studies record numbers of reviews, even within a shortened period of that second review on the public website. After that second public review, then our Standards Recommendation Committee, the legislatively appointed committee, came together to take the feedback from our educator review teams and make some additional comments themselves. So there's some back and forth between the educator review teams and the Standards Recommendation Committee as you get to that sort of final stage in the revision process. And in this case, that was through March of 2017, earlier this year. That led to the first reading back in April before this body. And at that time, you heard from some of our educator work team members themselves who had done a lot of the work to revise these standards. You also heard from the Standards Recommendation Committee, who presented that for first reading. And again, part of the design there that led to the recommendation was really looking to make sure that our standards are rigorous, that they embed the right practices across the grades and subjects within Tennessee history and other social studies content areas, that we're looking at the role of geography throughout these standards carefully, and also looking at covering religion in a very consistent standard way across these various grades and subjects within the social studies standards. We just talked, but there's been a number of changes in first reading, the most sort of notable of which is based on the Senator Douglas Henry Tennessee History Act that was passed this last legislative session. That was the topic of our recent conversation here, so I won't belabor that. But the Tennessee History course was again a new charge to these committees. So we had to work on a more expedited timeline to pull together various members of the educator review teams and the Standards Recommendation Committee on a pretty short timeline at the conclusion of our, quote, formal review process. So they met back at the end of May to look at sort of, again, across the K-12 spectrum, where would be the best place to put this Tennessee history course. And as we discussed, after a lot of discussions and sort of, considering the trade-offs of various placement, they came to the conclusion that the second half of 5th grade would be the best place for this Tennessee history course, but also wanting to make sure that we maintain a focus on Tennessee history in those early grades, 3 and 4, as well as a distinct focus in 8th grade through the lens of sort of how Tennessee helped shape the evolution of America. And then in high school, you still have the U.S. history course, as well as, again, a new elective on Tennessee history that's available as well. Let's see, so I wanted to just note some of the major changes. Again, I've mentioned the 5th grade, sort of second half of 5th grade is now Tennessee history. 3rd grade also was changed, though, just in terms of organizational structure, to have 2 parts as well for first semester and second semester. We received feedback from a number of other educator and stakeholder groups, and there are a few other changes to some of the standards that you can see here. Many of the other changes were around clarity and sort of just the standard kind of revision that happens between a first and final reading on a document this large. So that brings us to the result and the standards that are before you for final reading tomorrow. We really believe that this is fulfilling both the recent sort of charge from the General Assembly, as well as our duty to students and teachers across the state to have a really rigorous foundation for social studies instruction. And we are happy to take any questions. And Lee Cummins, though this is her last official meeting, has been leading a lot of this work, so I want to make sure to thank her and Katie from the department who's there with her as well. They've worked very closely together over the process for reviewing these standards. And I don't know the answer to your questions. These ladies will help me out. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions that you have that we haven't covered yet.
Any questions for Sarah?
When did these standards get implemented?
That is a great question. So these standards will not actually be implemented until the 1920 school year. And that's in part to sort of stagger, there's a lot of things that have to happen after the standards are sort of passed on final reading. The assessments have to be kind of constructed to align with the standards. Textbooks have to be reissued. So there's a bit of a lag there between when the final reading will occur and then when they'll be fully implemented. 1920. There's no other questions. The second part of our standards presentation is about world
Yes,
languages.
any other discussion while we're here with the amendment that Allison mentioned? I've got it written out here, and we'll get that to everybody, but it looks like it fits well with the other items that are identified for this particular standard. So it's just a matter of including certainly in Tennessee, there were divisions amongst the state when we were talking about the Civil War. So,
And we'll make sure we have that language for all the members before tomorrow.
Okay.
There's no other questions on social studies. I was going to tell you, I'm thrilled to get to introduce Christy Gilliland, who's here with us from Williamson County, who's led the World Languages review process. And this is a really, I think, unique area for the review process to sort of play out, because World Languages, as she'll describe, had a number of things that they were trying to juggle as they thought about how to standardize the standards across a host of different kinds of languages. So I'm going to turn over to you.
Hola. Bonjour. Ni hao, salue. So, give me just a moment to get this settled. I don't know if Dr. Queen remembers or not, but I did apply for a position with Lipscomb 6 years ago to replace Dr. Richard Jones. And I would just like to publicly thank you for not giving me that position, because I actually have flourished in my current position. So thank you for that very much. I appreciate it.
Success point.
So thank you for your time today. I'm excited to share our work that the committee has done. It is a committee that I would like to thank Katie and Lee and her supervisors for putting together. It was a wonderful experience, and I think I can speak for all of us. It was a fantastic professional experience. We really enjoyed working together. We pushed back, we gave, we surrendered, we really did learn a lot from each other, and I'm really proud to share the work that we have accomplished with you today. We had a ranging of committee members from all the way from elementary up to higher ed. So I think that's important when you think about this. So I want you to be thinking about questions that you have for me at the end. So it's similar to the process that Sarah described with the review process. This was, want to point out to you, really important that we got teacher and stakeholder input. I guess I could say also, Sarah, that it was record-breaking because it was our first. So we had our first survey for Educators for World Language, and they were very excited to be able to participate in that. So we did get information. And then once we went through our first draft, we did actually get those higher ed folks involved, because that's where our students go on to. And we thought that was very important to involve them as well. And so then again, once we had our draft ready, we got, again, input from teachers, and all the stakeholders as well were able to contribute to that, which I will guarantee makes for our better product that you're going to have in front of you for vote tomorrow. So I want to talk a little bit about the feedback that we got from our teachers very briefly. Our national governing body is this ACTSL, the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, which I'm very excited to say the convention is going to be here in Nashville this year. That's about an every 10-year event, so very timely for our teachers. They wanted to align with that national organization as well and really focus on language acquisition. They really wanted students to be able to leave us and have skills that apply to the real world. They really asked us to set language goals. Where do we want our students to be? Because once you set those goals, you know you can back plan and know where to start with your educational plan. So they really wanted to be able to track and measure student progress. That's been a real challenge for our world language programs. We also want to incorporate the 5 C's, which I'm going to talk more about in just a second. And we really, really wanted, teachers really wanted to be able to use the target language in class. And not only teachers use the target language, but expect students to use the target language. Some of you are thinking back to your world language experience and going, so I'm going to talk about that in just a second. So can I get a quick show of hands? How many of you had a world language in your growing up, in your experience? How many of you feel confident about right now going to another country and surviving? 3, so 10%? This is why we've got to do something different, right? We cannot keep doing the same thing we've been doing and get different results. That's why we're here. So I'm excited about these standards and share them with you and get them in the hands of our teachers. In the past, we've had a very teacher-centered, the teacher is the fount of all knowledge. We're really going to change that by bringing in those authentic resources, letting the teacher take second stage, no longer sage on the stage, but really student-centered language and getting input not only from the teacher, but also those authentic resources that we now, thanks to the internet, have access to. I'm not sure we could have done this, honest to goodness, 20 years ago, but now we can. We're not going to focus again on isolated skills, reading, writing, listening, and speaking. I'm going to talk about how we are going to incorporate that. And no longer concentrating on synthetic situations from a textbook. We've all read, imagine that you are in a foreign country. 15-year-old can't imagine. They've never been to a foreign country. So how can we create real-world situations and give them practice for what's going to happen in the real world, but still within our classrooms? So no longer testing to find out what students don't know. We're going to really concentrate on what can you do and how might that be a more motivational factor for our students. No longer Friday Culture Fridays. Remember everybody of those? Culture Friday, you watch your video, you do the worksheet. Really getting rid of that and really finding those ways of incorporating culture, which cannot be separated from the language. It just cannot. So now we're going to go to student-centered classroom, focusing on that integration of the modes of communication, getting those interpersonal skills, those interpretive, the presentational, real-world tasks. Can they leave our classrooms and go use the language? So we're going to really be able to give them a backward design model where they know where they're going. And not only that, not just a mystery for the teacher to know, but tell the students, this is where you're going, very transparent. Let the kids know, hey, this is what I want you to be able to do, and here's how I'm going to walk you to get there. We're going to give them real cultural knowledge that impacts the language that they use, and we're going to talk more about those in the standards. But we're really shifting what students know about language, grammar, structures, verb drills. Those are all important, but they shouldn't be the focus. We're no longer going to design, this is my reflexive pronoun lesson. Okay, we're going to move to lessons that have thematic units. What is a family? Who is in my family and why are they important to me? So those that shift, the language skills still have to be there. We still have to learn reflexive pronouns, but we're going to be learning them in the context of the language. So we're going to really move to focusing what students can do with language. I'm really excited about that shift. Just to give you a quick example, all of you in here, we could talk about learning how to swim. We could sit right here where we are, and we could talk about our breathing. We could talk about, if we really wanted to get fancy, we could lay on the floor and practice the arm and leg movements. But what haven't we done? We haven't gotten wet. We're not in the water. And unfortunately, I think that's where our foreign language education has been for the past few decades. We haven't gotten wet. So we've got to get teachers using the language. We've got to especially get students using the language every day, every day. So this is our national governing body recommendation, that ACTFL, ACTFL. You can see that these different C's that teachers wanted to really incorporate into the standards, this is still the same. So teachers are still going to recognize that we're using the 5 C's and planning our standards around that as well. When we look at this, you're going to notice that we still have a separation between our modern languages and our classical languages. And I think that was very important. We heard that loud and clear on our survey results, that those classical teachers also wanted to keep those standards separate. But when you look here, this is what we are moving to. This is a proficiency scale, and we use the word proficiency a little bit differently than you kind of were talking about earlier. Either a lot of times you are not proficient you are proficient or you're above proficient, So you are always proficient in a world language. What this chart tells you is just how well you can speak a language. So that's good. So that's kind of a shift in terminology when you hear me speak about that. Just very briefly, let's talk about what this means to you and to learners. These novice levels at the bottom are parrots. All they can do is mimic back what you say. They actually make very little mistakes because it's all memorized language. When you move on to the intermediates, these are your survivors. These are the students that I feel completely comfortable taking them to France, putting them in the Place de la Concorde, and say, okay, come back in 2 hours. You do not want to do that with the parrots. You will not see them again. So you really, really want to know your students and where they are. And then you've got the storytellers, people that can really interchange and tell stories in all 3 time frames, and really capable in the language. To give you an idea, your average native speaker, advanced mid. Advanced mid, just to kind of give you an idea. The praxis for teachers generally requires about an advanced low, just to kind of give you some perspective. So what that means is we are constrained by our time. What's the #1 language requirement for learning a language? Time in the language. And so this is what we feel confident, the committee decided that we feel confident that we could do in the amount of time. So no more is there Spanish 1 designation, Spanish 2. There are going to be courses for that. But what we have created are goals by level. Level 1, no matter the language, minus some minor adjustments for those logographic languages, your Chinese, your Russian. They're actually going to be a little bit lower targets, which is addressed in that standards document. So for your average modern languages, your Spanish, French, German, these are your goals. Novice high, remember, they're the parrot. They can't survive on their own. But after the 2nd year that we're shooting for that intermediate low. So just wanted to give you an idea of that different structure. What this also allows for is different entry points for different ages. We have several, and I'm hoping more, elementary programs across the state. This allows for a novice can be 5 years old, 15, or 50. When you start at the beginning, you're a beginner. And you move up this proficiency scale. So just to give you an idea of what we used to have and what we have now, our previous standards were pretty basic. Understand and interpret, okay, the student able to use, give. Those words are very difficult to measure. Understand, use. So what we have proposed is a list of standards that actually, you'll notice, this is your novice low, what you saw before on the pyramid chart, a pathway to help teachers get students to be able to accomplish and build those skills using the language. So they build from low to mid to high for each level, and you're going to notice more measurable language. They don't have to just understand, but they have to demonstrate understanding. And how do they do that? They do that identifying. They have to isolate words. They have to indicate. They have to follow the narrative. So those words that help teachers really be able to measure. So what I propose to you today, the standards that you have in front of you for this first draft reading are a real pathway to help our students be in command of their future and to really create a pathway of having an actual skill that makes our students more college and career ready. And I'll be glad to take any questions that you have.
Good question. Wendy.
How can we have like 1,000 more of you? You make me want to like sign up to learn a language. So I'm glad you didn't.
Very passionate.
So I thank you. I think your love of this makes me, seriously, I think I'm going to learn. I'm a parrot.
Wonderful. I'm excited for the shift for our students.
Other questions?
Okay, so you presented the novice plan to take away, like, say, your Spanish 1 and your Spanish 2 and give that full proficiency scale.
Mm-hmm.
What ages are we talking about being able to implement these standards?
The great thing about it is we're not taking away Spanish 1 or Spanish 2. But what we're doing is giving them a designation that's meaningful. For example, what does it mean when you can do when I give you an 87? That's really intangible. Am I good? Am I bad? Can I survive if you drop me off in France? But what we're hoping is that not only our teachers will understand this scale, but our students as well, and be able to speak knowledgeably about their path to proficiency and performance, and be able to articulate, I'm a novice mid, I don't need to be left alone. I know I'm working towards being an intermediate low where I can be. Does that answer your question?
Not really.
Okay.
The question I'm more asking is, are we looking at putting these standards into a high school setting, or are we looking at putting these into an elementary setting where you're going to be able to, by my age, be able to use this language? Because I've got a quick example. I really looked into this one a lot. That I had a friend, he was a foreign exchange student, come from Spain. He was 16 years old, and he come to America and lived for a year. There was not one person in my entire high school that could carry on a conversation with him in his tongue, which was Spanish. So are we looking at putting these standards into a high school setting where students are going to be able to hear them for 2 years? Because I've already taken all of my Spanish credits to graduate. So theoretically, I should be able to have a conversation with him, but I couldn't. So is this going to be used at a younger age so that these can be beneficial for our students, so that when they graduate, that they can be able to carry on and use this? Or are we going to put it in a high school setting so that no matter what standards we have and how they're set to be used, they're not going to be useful? Because in this, the packet of the standards, I looked at it, and I can't find it right now, but it gives like a proficiency level based on the education you've had. And what it says is at the bottom tier, it has like novice something, I can't remember what it is, and it says job applications for this and education experience. Year 1 and 2, job application, none. So what it's saying is our graduation requirements for a foreign language are not helping students in any way in a professional field. And so as my mind would be for the board, that if we're going to take the time to set these standards and to really put this together, that we're going to want it to benefit our students, not only out maybe in a college setting, but in a workplace environment too. And so that's my question is, when are we going to implement these so that they can be the most beneficial to our students in Tennessee?
And what level? Go ahead.
My first response is preach. And I totally hear you. And you are the student that we're wanting to serve. And the reality is the most important factor for learning a language is time. So if we build more capacity in our elementary schools, then we are going to see real skills. He's right. As of right now, level 2, which is the 2-year requirement, which is ambitious as well, to be honest. Intermediate mid is the first opportunity that ACTFL, our national governing body, says you can use it in the workplace. And that is to be a cashier, a clerk. As you move up intermediate high, that's more your firefighter, people that interact more with the community. So he is exactly right. And I'll give you your $20 that I owe you later. But really, what he says is true. It takes time. And one of the saddest things that I can see in my own district, our students that go on to the AP level, 6%. But here's what I know, Hayden. As a nation, we have been, at the end of level 1, we've been scoring about novice high. After level 2, as a nation, guess what we've been scoring? Novice high. After level 3, guess what we've been scoring? Novice high. It's got to give. It's got to change. We've got to get the kids using the language. So I can see a student after year 2 going, why would I go to year 3 if I don't know anything more than I did after level 1? So it is our responsibility as educators to make sure our students have a pathway to get a usable skill. It's got to be a new day. And it's going to take some mindset shift. We've been working on it for 2 years in my district. We have been really trying to shift teachers' minds that you don't plan the lesson around reflexive pronouns. We didn't grow up that way. My mom didn't look at me and say, I'm sorry, you have to make a complete sentence before I can give you this cookie. But this is what we do all the time in world language class. Something has to change. And this is, I think, the beginning, Hayden, of something much more appropriate and much more skill-based. based, getting away from that knowing about languages to actually using and doing languages. Good question, Hayden.
Okay, Sarah?
One last question. And
Yes,
now
Sarah.
I think in addition to replicating you, we also clearly need to.
I know,
replicate
I know.
Hayden.
Can I take him to all my meetings?
That was on point, and it was, I mean, truly, that's reflective of my experience as well. I took
Yes.
Spanish for 12 years and still can't, I mean, speak
Mhm.
it. I can, you know, barely
Mhm.
survive with my phrase books when I'm traveling.
Yes.
So I think this is so needed and
Mhm.
just really well thought out and planned, and I thank you for your leadership in this
Sure.
work. The question I was going to ask, we mentioned earlier in the legislative update about the American Sign Language. And
Yes.
sort of, again, the sort of coincidence and timeliness of the review on world
Yes.
languages and that bill passing. Could you speak to how this is incorporating some of the ASL provisions?
Absolutely. It's actually very seamless to incorporate ASL. We associate language with a spoken language, but the difference for ASL is that it's a visual rather than an auditory. So it actually, the standards apply completely, and it's really wonderful. One of the things that's exciting too, along those same lines of what these standards can incorporate, one of the national movements has also been using Latin as a more modern language. So while there are classical standards, there are teachers who could take these modern standards and conduct Latin class as if it were a modern language. But we like to be able to give teachers the choice to how they chose to proceed. So again, so that ASL is seamless as well as incorporating that Latin into a modern language. Sure.
Now, I've often thought that one of the values in world languages is that you learn about a culture other than your own. I'm assuming that that's not taken out of
Absolutely not.
what you've got here. It's more than just
Exactly.
learning the language.
One of the things that we address is this concept of interculturality. It's where communication meets culture and where they overlap. That can't be separated. Where we make mistakes, say our military, is we learn the language, but we don't learn the culture. And we put our foot in it when we don't. So that cannot be separated. I've seen it done to poor results. We should not. And so these specifically ask our teachers to incorporate not only the culture, but the culture with the language. And one of the best ways we do that in the classroom is via those authentic resources I told you about. When you pull up that commercial made in Spain and use it in the classroom, oh, why are they all home in the middle of the day? Well, business is closed, they all shut down. You know, and you learn those intangible cultural aspects, but also learning the language as well. Excellent question, Jane.
Okay. Other questions?
And that research shows the younger you are, when you start to learn a foreign language, the easier it becomes. So perhaps with all the downtime in elementary school, we might put some of it in. Teasing, but I'm
Downtime? Where's the?
Throw my
Okay.
soul.
Okay.
And she said that it's easier to learn younger. I did lots of research into bilingual students, and in every aspect that we've talked about testing today by the TN Ready testing, a bilingual student will outperform a monolingual student every single time because their mind is trained to be so much more comprehensive and so much sharper because of the fact that they're not only using one language, but they use two. And so it makes them more test ready, which is then going to make our test results be even better, which is, in the end of the day, what we want.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
Where do we find this?
Okay.
He's like a unicorn.
It's all my tutoring.
Proximity. I will say, talk to Tiffany, so they've, you know, our past student members are passing on her strong vibes.
Thank you for your care to the topic, Hayden. I really appreciate that.
You know, I know we've talked about not getting this implemented, also the social studies,
Right.
till the school year 2019-20. I'm assuming that there's no way to move that, do it quicker than that. You know, I just, all these standards, I think are such improvements. I just would love to see it done as quickly as we possibly could.
I think once the new standards are out, people are certainly going to be looking at them. So even though they're not formally adopted until 1920 because of the textbook kind of delay in terms of that adoption cycle and the assessment and review, I mean, I think people will be utilizing them in transition. Yeah.
Sure. And one of the things I encourage you to talk to your school districts about is seeking out professional development for your teachers. before they have to implement this in their classroom. How nice of them to get it ahead of time to get in that, because it is a mindset shift, a big one for some of our educators that have been in the classroom for a while. So if I can help with that, please reach out to me. I have some wonderful resources to get your teachers in the know on the new path to proficiency.
Okay, great, Kristen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just, one more comment. I commented several times today about the value I think that we've got in this standards review process and what's happening there. And I think with both social studies and world languages, another example of really getting some good standards in place and really getting the involvement of educators throughout our community and getting real commitment to these standards. So good process. Okay. Teacher license, let's see, we got another
So we
one.
had two more, and this is on, I'll just take the blank. We forgot to put this on the workshop agenda, but it's a brief update on our master plan.
Yep.
I think we'll have time for, given that our cases are not quite as speedy as we thought they were going to be this one.
Okay.
Well, fortunately, also with me going at the end of the day, we've covered quite a few things that I'll be presenting on, so I'll be able to go through those a little quicker. But anyway, I'm here today to give everyone just a brief update on kind of the main things that the board and the staff have been working on so far in 2017. And obviously in a 10 to 15 minute presentation, it's going to be difficult to cover everything. But we're going to talk about the main areas that we set in our 2017 master plan as priorities for the state board's work, and just where we are right now at the end of half the year and what we expect to do for the rest of the year. So these are the 4 strategic priority areas that we identified in the master plan, and they're the same as the ones that we had last year. So they are high quality school options, great teachers and leaders, high standards and quality measures, and public engagement and oversight. And so since we have the same goals as a state that we're working towards of getting into the top half of NAEP and getting our average ACT score to 21, and getting half of the graduating class of 2020 to have some sort of post-secondary credential, we felt that we wanted to keep continuity from last year and focus on some of the main issues that we'd already been working on, but we did do even more to synthesize into strategic policy levers, kind of the main areas where we felt like we could make an impact this year. So in terms of assessing the impact that we've been able to make in those different areas, we have sort of a brief scoring system that we've used for the different goals that we had in each policy lever. So anything that you see a check mark next to in the initial slide for one of our policy levers means that that's something that we've already accomplished this far in the year. Anything with a filled in bullet point is something that we are currently working on and that we've made progress towards. And then anything that you see that's a bullet point that isn't filled in is something where we do intend to accomplish some stuff this year, but we haven't yet really gotten started on those efforts. So just something to remember as we go through these slides, and hopefully that'll help clarify all the information that I'm going to try to present. So the first strategic priority area that we had this year was high quality school options. And so for this year, the policy lever that we focused on was charter school authorization. And since this is going to be the year in which the state board opens its first school as an authorizer here in Tennessee, we wanted to make sure that we did that right, and we went through that process as effectively as possible. So here we've outlined 4 goals that we had under that policy lever. So those were to develop a performance contract with Green Dot, who's the operator of the school that we have opening, to develop, approve, and implement the statutorily required policies that'll be necessary for our work as a charter school authorizer. The staff also wanted to complete the pre-opening process for Bluff City High School, which is the school that's going to be opening in just a couple weeks in Memphis. And then finally, they wanted to finalize the development of the oversight functions that the board will need to be performing, and to begin the process of actually monitoring that information, which will start once the school actually opens in the fall. So in terms of how we've been able to do towards that work, we did get the performance contract approved at this year's January board meeting. So we were able to successfully get that executed and approved. Moving forward, the required policies that the board will need to have in order to perform its duties as an authorizer were passed on first reading at the April board meeting, and they're up for final reading at this month's meeting. The pre-opening work has also been moving along really well. The team has their last pre-opening visit scheduled for, I believe, August 2nd, in preparation for the opening of Bluff City High School, which is going to be on August 7th. And just a little bit of information on the school that we're going to be opening. I think we're going to have 160 ninth grade students this year. So we're very excited about all of that. And another note related to that work is that Jay and Mackenzie put in a ton of work to make sure that our State Board Schools website was up and running, and we were able to launch that website successfully on July 19th. So that's up and going right now. And then finally, the last step that the charter team is really going to be focusing on for the rest of the year is to begin that monitoring work once the school is actually open in the fall. So that's something that obviously hasn't begun yet, but they're definitely ready to get started on that. And so just a couple of specific next steps in the preparation for the opening of Bluff City High School. As I mentioned, there's one more pre-visit to go, and then there's also going to be, after the school officially opens, a celebration co-hosted by the State Board and Green Dot in Memphis on August 15th. Then looking forward a bit, the team is getting ready to gear up for the pre-opening work for KIPP Nashville Primary, which is the second State Board school that's going to be opening. And that's going to be, I believe, in the 18-19 school year. And then finally, not necessarily related to authorization, but they're gearing up for their charter school appeals in the fall and potentially, if necessary, working as the authorizer for any schools that go through that process and that the board feels that should be approved that haven't been at the district level. So that's our first priority area. The second one that we have is great teachers and leaders. And within this priority area, we actually have two policy levers that we wanted to focus on this year. So the first of those was educator preparation programs. So a major part of our work in this area has been working with our stakeholders to kind of gauge the feedback and the response to the redesigned teacher preparation report card that we released last December. So we've been collecting a lot of feedback there, and the goal there is to kind of take that feedback, synthesize it, and use it to produce a refined version of the report card, although the 2017 version won't be coming out until February 2018, as we talked about with the annual reports. Another major goal in this area that we had was to work with the implementation of the revised educator preparation policy, and one of the main areas that this is played out is through work to incorporate the annual reports into the comprehensive and interim reviews that the board will be doing for the state's teacher prep programs and specialty area programs, which is ongoing. And then finally, another area that we wanted to focus on was leader preparation. So we've begun looking into sort of the state of leader prep across the country and doing some work there as well. So in terms of specific points that we've worked through, we did have another round of feedback collection this spring for the report card. So we created a survey that we sent out to stakeholders who are either at the EPP level, at the district level, or who are currently in a teacher preparation program. We also held a series of focus groups at the TACD, which is the Tennessee Association of Colleges of Teacher Education conference that they had this spring, and we were able to hear people's ideas there in a more personal setting rather than the online survey that we used. And then we also wanted to make sure that districts are aware of the report card. So we went and spoke at the TASPA, which is Tennessee Association of School Professional Administrators, and that was back in February. And so we are going to be continuing to collect feedback, but that kind of formed the basis of starting our work for preparing for the next version of the teacher prep report card. And so hopefully we'll be able to take into account some of the things that we heard there about either things that they wanted to change with the redesigned version that we released in 2016 or things that we'd like to add to future versions. Shifting a little bit to the focus on the educator preparation policy, as I mentioned, a lot of this work is focused on the annual reports, and the first versions of those were released this past March. And so the staff has begun laying the groundwork to incorporate these into the reviews that we'll be doing of EPPs and specialty area programs. But a lot of that is still to come, and that's definitely something that we hope to focus on moving forward at both the subcommittee level and with the whole board. Finally, leader preparation. Our former policy fellow, Ari Goldstein, did a literature review and kind of just a wide-ranging deep dive into the topic, and unfortunately he found that this isn't particularly an area with a lot of established best practices. So we're continuing to work with the department, and I know they've put together a working group focused on leader prep. And so we hope to be able to make some decisions about the leader prep policy and really make sure that we're using the right assessments and we have the right requirements in place there. But that's work that is also still largely ongoing. So in terms of specific next steps, as far as the report card goes, the biggest thing that we have coming up is our advisory council. So this is an effort that we undertook last year as part of the redesign process, where we brought together stakeholders at the EPP level, the district level, and folks from the advocacy community who are also involved in a lot of our work, and kind of brought them some specific decision points that we had about the report card, and they helped inform those decisions. So we have a similar group coming together again this year, and their first meeting is going to be towards the end of August on the 22nd. And so they'll hopefully be guiding us as we work to prepare all the data and make any necessary changes that we'll be making for the report card this year in preparation for the launch next February. And then another piece of this work that we're hoping to continue to do is to meet with the EPPs and their leadership to talk about both their report card results and the annual report data that they have. We've already met with UT Martin and Austin P and had very productive conversations with them about what the data says about their programs and what they can be doing differently with it. And we definitely hope to bring in a couple other EPPs in the near future and have those conversations with them as well, as we try to make this a continuous conversation rather than just a one-time event that's released every year. So I mentioned there are two priority levers that we're focusing on in the great teachers and leaders area. And so the second one there is teacher licensure, which is another fairly broad area. One major undertaking that we've gone through recently is to make sure that stakeholders are aware of the new disciplinary rules and making sure that we're transparent about what that entails. We also want to make sure that the content assessments that we're using to prepare people to become teachers and to use as that licensure screen are the correct assessments, and that they're both aligned to Tennessee standards and doing a good enough job of kind of serving as that screen between who gets to become a teacher in Tennessee and who doesn't. And then another step that we had hoped to take based off of that work is to determine whether or not we actually need new content assessments or whether the current ones are serving our needs as best as possible. So that is work, as you can see by the blank bullet point there, that has yet to be begun, but is going to stem off of the work that we're already doing for the content assessments.
I just want to jump in right there real quickly too. Amy Owen, who's leads our team, part of that delay has been our transition in the role of Director of Research and Policies. I can tell you with confidence that we have a really good plan working in partnership with the department. It's going to be delayed by a couple months based on our earlier projections for the work, but we'll still be making progress by our October meeting to bring back to the full board on that area. Is there anything else you want to add, Amy?
That sounds great. We're going to be bringing together a committee of educators to review some ELA and math assessments from a couple different vendors in late August, and we'll convene the board subcommittee in September.
Great. So as I mentioned, we had a new educator licensure rule that changed some of the disciplinary policies, and that did take effect on July 19th. And the state board staff has really been making an active effort to make sure that all of the impacted stakeholders are aware of this rule and what it entails. So I know some of our staff has been specifically trying to reach out to stakeholders, and Elizabeth Taylor, our general counsel, came to the TASPA conference and presented on the new educator rule as well when we spoke to them about the report card. As Sarah and Amy just mentioned, we've already begun the work on assessing the current licensure assessments that we use and determining whether or not they're correct. But again, the major step for that is going to be bringing together that review committee at the end of August, and hopefully from there we'll be able to determine whether or not we need to do anything differently in those subject areas, as well as whether or not we want to move beyond secondary math and elementary reading to determine if there are other subjects that need a similar treatment.
Really asterisk put there is that it was scheduled to take effect on July 19th, the new teacher discipline rule, but because of the request for a public hearing, you'll be voting on emergency rule for that same topic, and then we'll have that public hearing and come back with the full rule later this year.
And so specific next steps in this area, as we mentioned, we're going to convene those educators and teacher educators to talk about those specific assessments. Then from there, we'll be able to bring the findings from that group to the teacher licensure and preparation subcommittee. And we hope that those folks will be able to make a more specific recommendation on next steps for what we need to do in terms of both those subject areas and determining if we need to do a similar process for additional subject areas. And then finally, we hope to continue our stakeholder outreach to those stakeholders who are going to be working with this new discipline rule and making sure that they're fully aware of the impact of that. So that brings us to our third strategic priority area, which is high standards and quality measures. And again, this was a topic that we really synthesized our focus on this year. And so the priority lever that we identified was the standards review process. So obviously we've talked about a lot of this already today. We wanted to make sure that the social studies standards that are coming before the board for final reading this month were shared with the public and that they had the opportunity to provide input on that in a meaningful way. And then we also wanted to work closely with the Standards Recommendation Committee to figure out exactly which standards we'd want to be bringing. And I think everyone who was involved with that process feels really good about the work that they've done, as they should. They all worked very hard on that. We also wanted to kind of look beyond just the actual process of developing the standards and put together an external report on the standards review process. And then we also were hoping to finalize some internal documentation of the standards review process, some strengths that have occurred there, how the division of labor has broken down, just as sort of a means of providing some guidance for that process moving forward as we try to figure out what that looks like in the future. So we did have the standards posted for public feedback in late 2016, and they have been approved on first reading. As we talked about today, legislation added in a Tennessee history course, which is going to be different from what was voted on at the April meeting, but they are up for final reading at this month's July meeting. We also hope to have the external report finalized, and apparently we have that finalized, so another success there, which I guess we can change to a check mark on the previous slide. And then with the enactment of the social studies standards, that's going to allow for more work to be done on the internal documentation and figuring out exactly what we want to take away from the process that we've gone through for the standards review. So as I mentioned, specific next steps, we're hoping to get the social studies standards officially approved, and then from there, going back to that work for the internal documentation. And then, as we also talked about, the world languages standards are up for first reading in July as well. So that brings us to our final strategic priority area, which is public engagement and oversight. And this is another one where we identified 2 policy levers as being particularly important for this year. So the first of those is board member engagement. So looking specifically at this, we wanted to focus on providing days in the district for our board members where they'd have the opportunity to go into their districts and interact with education partners and concerned citizens who are interested in learning more about the role that the state board plays in education. We also encourage our board members to become involved in education work more broadly than just the work that they do for the board, although that is much appreciated on its own. And then we've also been tracking the media engagements that the board has been a part of individually, just to make sure that we're aware of the full impact that the state board is able to have on Tennessee education. So far we've only been able to have 1 day in the district, but it was a combined day for the 4th and the 6th districts back in April, and from what I've heard, it was a great success. We've been able to start looking into the planning for additional days in the district, but that's more going to be occurring in the fall when students are back in school. We've also had a wide range of external engagements, and just from what I've heard from board members, this has included meeting with superintendent study councils, reaching out to individual stakeholders in their communities, and talking with parents and other citizens about specific policies that they're concerned about, as well as working with teachers in their districts and school leaders and that sort of thing. And so far we've had a combined 37 media engagements from our members collectively, and that's something that we hope to match or even exceed in the second half of the year as well. So next steps for that, I mentioned we're hoping to get days in the district scheduled for as many board members as possible for the second half of the year. In addition to those visits, we're also hoping to schedule some visits for the board members at Bluff City High School, since it is the first school that the state board will be authorizing. And as the authorizer, we feel a sense of responsibility there. And then, as I mentioned, we're hoping to keep up the external and media engagement throughout the second half of the year as well. So the second policy lever that we had in the public engagement and oversight area was the policy audit. And so at the beginning of the year, our goal was to complete the comprehensive rule and policy audit that we started last year. We also wanted to make sure that there was a clearly defined schedule for regular policy and rule review. So that way we don't need to undergo a policy review every so often to make sure that everything is up to date. And then finally, an additional goal that we had with all of our reviews of rules and policies was to make sure that everything that we were enacting and everything that we have enacted is compliant with the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, and the state's plan for that. So we have had 19 policies that were either amended or eliminated as part of the policy audit since I gave this update last year. And I know that the state board staff is coordinating with TDOE to schedule the remaining policies. And now that we have Amy Owen in our Director of Research and Policy role, we'll be able to move forward in that work in a way that we kind of weren't able to for a little while with that position empty. And as we continue to do that, we'll definitely be focusing on ESSA compliance. And that'll be something that even tomorrow you begin to see as we bring the special education endorsement policy up for review. And then, yeah, so we'll begin reviewing identified policies specifically as part of the policy audit at the October meeting. And as I mentioned on the last slide, ESSA compliance is going to be a key consideration there. Then just to close things out, there are a couple of miscellaneous things that I added that didn't fit into any of the master plan categories, but I thought were important, although Nathan already covered a lot of this. So we'll be having a 14% reduction in the budget, but that's due to the standards funding ending. We also were able to get $1.8 million in pass-through funding for our charter schools, and that's a separate funding stream from the state board's operating budget. And also, as Nathan mentioned, we were able to get additional funding that added a full-time position. So I will be starting as an official state employee on August 1st. And then also, just in addition, I had the information about our members that were officially Senate confirmed this year. And obviously, we're very thrilled about that, but we're also excited about our new members who are replacing the additional folks who have rolled off now. So I think that's about it. We've talked about everything that the state board has done for the last 6 months. So thank you all.
Okay,
if there are any questions.
For Spencer, any questions? Okay, well, I think, we do have a really good master plan in place, and I think obviously making good progress on the items that are in that master plan. So, Spencer, thank you for reviewing that with us. Okay, teacher license cases. We're going to have a presentation, or we just want to answer questions?
Questions.
Okay.
But I do have some updates for you all that should have been in your folders. So item B, Carrie Baker was removed from the agenda. Item C and E, Ann Chilcote and James Cotton. Ann Chilcote was a revocation.
Let's, you want to get the microphone?
I'm not used to the microphone. So I'll restart. So Carrie Baker was removed from the agenda, and then item C and item E, they were the same offense, Ann Chilcote and James Cotton. Ann Chilcote was originally a revocation in order to create some uniformity among the offenses. We've proposed a 2-year suspension for those two. Item D was Jennifer Collins. She has been removed from the agenda. And
item D?
Yes, Jennifer
Removed?
Collins.
Jennifer Collins.
Yes, she's been removed from the agenda.
Now, what did you say on item C?
So so the old item is item C. The new item is item B, Ann Chilcote. She was a revocation.
Okay, let's just stay with the original items.
In terms of the lettering.
Yeah, in terms of the lettering.
So the original item C, Ann Chilcote. And then the original item E, James Cotton. They both are a similar offense. We had some questions during one-on-one calls about why they were different proposed actions, and in an effort to taking that into consideration in an effort to create some uniformity about similar offenses. Item C, the original item C, Ann Chilcote, she was a revocation. We are now proposing that she is a 2-year suspension, and that is congruent with item E, James Cotton.
Okay.
And then item Q,
Mm-hmm.
which is Benjamin Tollett. We have proposed and agreed 1 year suspension for him as opposed to the 2 year suspension. And so tomorrow we will be presenting an order for you all to vote on at the board meeting tomorrow
Okay,
for Ben Tollett.
has everybody got the changes?
I have one more change, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Item S, which was Kimberly Walker, she has been removed from the agenda. And now those are all of the changes. And if you all have any questions, Wendy?
The ones who were removed, is it because they requested hearing?
Yes.
Okay, all three?
Yes.
All right. And I have a couple more questions. Do you want me to? Okay. On E, Mr. Cotton?
Yes.
It looked like he was actually criminally charged for the alcohol offense, and then he did intensive outpatient. Do you have judgments on what actually happened in court on his?
No, I do not have the judgment. I just have the affidavit of complaints and then that he went through the outpatient program.
Can we find out before we vote tomorrow what the outcome of his criminal case was? I think that's relevant, obviously.
Okay, I will do that. I will look into that.
My guess is it was retired on proof or dismissed on proof or something, but I'd rather know than assume, because if he was convicted, it may make a difference.
Okay, I will do that.
And then on I and P, I had, they're both the two retroactive, which would mean these two teachers, they're both from 2015, it looks like. Looks like they would be immediately eligible to teach again.
And they're older because of the lag and turnover from my position.
Right.
So, yeah.
I'm not blaming you. You weren't here. I get it. But my question is, both of those are, well, one is physical contact with a student, right? Ms. Hicks.
Yes.
And then denial, and then they had video, and then she lost her mind and stormed out. So I'm just curious about the 2-year retroactive on that.
And I'll address that one first. The thinking was behind this one is comparing it to some of the other cases where there was a pattern of behavior where the instructor used several different means of discipline that was inappropriate in the classroom versus this offense being an isolated offense, and she was returned to the classroom after her suspension and reprimand. I do know that she did resign and that she was not renewed for a new year, but that was the thinking behind this case compared to some of the other cases where we've gotten a harsher punishment of such as revocation or just a straight up 2-year suspension. And because it was an older matter as well.
I may ask to pull that one tomorrow only because I don't, and I appreciate like your legal analysis that you have to do. For me, I don't want to have to see a pattern of abusing kids before I'm gonna let them go back. So that, I mean, and there may not be a pattern, but I may pull that one just to give you a heads up. I want to look at it again. And then on Stroud, said they forged the principal's signature on the IEP. Was there any was there any documentation about why? Was this a matter of like principal was in the IEP and had walked out and they were trying to get the paperwork done, or they were circumventing federal law by not having? I mean, do we have any idea?
My understanding from speaking with Ms. Stroud and the information I have from the district is that another instructor who was supposed to do the IEP documents asked her to sign the principal's signature, and she did, and she didn't have any interaction with this particular student or didn't actually teach the student or didn't work with IEP documents. She just did it at the behest of a teacher, colleague, friend.
Did the teacher, colleague, friend get disciplined?
Yes, and my understanding is that teacher, and I don't have her name, but that teacher license was revoked and she took full responsibility for the act.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Okay.
Any other questions?
Those are all mine, I think. Yep. The other ones were on ones that you pulled anyway, so.
Other questions?
I have a comment, and I want us to think about this one. Item R, Michelle Villarreal, we're recommending revocation. The paperwork from the district is very limited. She wrote a very impassioned letter to the board. A very passionate teacher if you read her letter, sounds like somebody whose heart and soul is into what she does. She was under stress. She did something regrettable. It's inexcusable. There's no question about it. But I don't feel like we have enough information from the district itself. It bothers me immensely that we're recommending revocation, because that, to me, is virtually a death sentence and there's no redemption. There are circumstances, it appears, mitigating circumstances, whether, you know, we buy them or not. I don't think we have enough information from the school district to revoke this person's license and say, you cannot, I know you told me she can ask for reinstatement immediately. The circumstances are not going to change. If we vote it tomorrow to revoke her license, nothing's going to change anybody else's opinion if they don't change it today. And to consider that there could be redemption in this case. I would say we pull it. That would be my recommendation. Get additional information from the district, because I don't think we have enough evidence, and it bothers me that we're recommending revocation. 2 cents.
Do we need to make does that need to be made as a motion tomorrow to pull it? Is that what's?
Yeah, or we're, you know, pulling items
Okay.
ahead.
Okay.
So.
Because I concur. I mean, if what they've charged her with is what happened, I may have a different opinion than you whether revocation's appropriate or not, but I do agree there's not a lot of information. So I think more information would be better if we can get it. And I know that's a challenge for you guys to get. That's not a knock on you for not having it. I know the districts can be, it can be hard to get that information from districts, but.
Okay, if we're in agreement, we can pull that item and ask for additional information. Okay, other questions? Okay, appreciate the questions, and certainly appreciate y'all's work on these. This is, of all the work that we do, I think this is the one that I dislike most. You know, it is not a pleasant experience, and you know, you're making judgments. You wish these things didn't happen to start with, and then you're making judgments. In many cases, you don't have all the information you'd like to have.
If I may, Chairman, you say our work, but the majority of it was Brittany. She jumped right in. She's new to the board and the staff attorney position. I'm more so here for moral support and to answer any questions that she might not know because she's new. But she did, again, from day one, she jumped right in and really took a hold of this. So she gets all the credit.
Okay, great. Brittany, great.
Thank you.
Thank you for your good work. Let me clarify one thing. On item 5 on the agenda, do we need to take action there, or is that an information item? Elizabeth, it's item 5.
It's information.
It's just information, so we do not, what we did, you know, we did this thing that we said that, you know, we had a uniform, really a statement that takes care of that on a basis. So the agenda says roll call vote, but we'll just use that for information. It is a list of the teachers that license.
It's for the student, the loan default payment actions.
Yeah. Okay, the other item we are going to announce tomorrow that our meetings for 2018 are January the 26th, April the 20th, July 27th, and October 19th. They're basically the same dates as this year, or the same position on the calendar as this year. And the plan would be that we'll continue to have the workshop. These are all Fridays, have the workshop on Thursday prior to it, and then have the meetings on January 26th, April the 20th, July 27th, October 19th, and we'll mention those again in the meeting tomorrow.
Do we know which of those are traveling and which of those are in Nashville
We
yet?
don't, but we would anticipate that we will do some traveling for at different locations. Yeah. Also, let me remind you, we've got a call meeting set up, and I don't have those dates right in front of me.
Nathan, do you have those? I'm pulling them. We'll share those tomorrow for sure for the record, but we've just confirmed with your team, Candace, to those dates.
Yeah, we haven't gotten that email yet.
No, but I think we've done the polling.
Yep.
and so
Yeah.
forth.
We'll announce those tomorrow, in terms of dates and times, those are hot off the press, I think, in terms of confirming with all parties.
Okay, anything else?
When's dinner?
Okay, great. We had this 4 o'clock drop dead date, and we made it. I do apologize. I apologize for not providing a break, but I was just confident we have a break and we're going for 15 minutes and we're never gonna get there, so.
Board members, you have a healthy right now, dinner's not healthy.
Yep.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Don't leave yet. I'm not leaving.